Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались в кущі, щоб лаптем посьорбати довбані щі, та трохи у чах перегрівся навар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Приперли зі сходу до нас барани для восстановлення
великої страни.
Найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Їх доводи всяке озброєння різне, потужні ракети, машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, а ми зачаїли на орків образу з російських бандитів, робить примар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російська поліція справи заводить, там вбивцю рашистів ніяк не знаходить, хто винен, що в нашому полі глухар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Веде пропаганду кремлівський урод, слова пропаганди ковтає народ, тепер нове слово знає цар.
Байрактар.
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 Yes.
The Leaf Spring Army sends its regards.
Русский военный корабль. Предлагаю сложить оружие и сдаться. Русский военный корабль, иди нахуй.
Пануєм і не браття у своїй.
Hello, everyone. I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, folks. It's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back to day 738 of the news. And it's good to see you all once again. And that Kerch Bridge is in some serious trouble. And it's good to see you all once again.
We're, of course, going to be covering the past 24 hours of the news of the war in Ukraine, the massive news of an armed uprising that's currently ongoing within the region of Ingushetia, or the Autonomous Republic of Ingushetia, in the southern part of the Russian Federation. We're also going to be talking about the drone attacks the Ukrainians conducted both inside of Crimea and also on St. Petersburg today, two massive events. We're also going to be talking about the major frontline actions that have been undertaken by the Ukrainian armed forces today as well. And not only that, a couple of other bigger things that happen inside of Russia and around the world as a whole. But I'm going to take y'all to one of the largest bits of news that we had outside of the video that we made today. And also, before I even move on, let me talk about that video really quickly. Some people, when they watched the video, were wondering where in the world was the video itself showing the firefight that happened inside of Ingushetia that was a part of the uprising that I was talking about on the video. You could find that in the link in the description below, or if you watched the video earlier today and you still did not see the clip, we'll be showing it here on stream tonight, or you can click on the link in the description in this stream to the day 738 map and go to the area of Ingushetia in southern Russia and click on these two clips, which are two separate ones that we were able to find of this armed uprising and firefight that happened in between the Russian FSB and the Ingushetian Free Armies, something along those lines is its official name. But moving on into the major breaking news that we had right before the stream went live, we got to hear that the Ukrainians have apparently attacked the oil silos within the major Russian port of Feodosia on the Crimean Peninsula. Feodosia is a port that was brought up not that long ago here on this channel, as it was subject to an attack by Ukrainian drone forces that destroyed one of the Russians' Robotyne-class landing ships and left it to sink right in its moorings right here in this harbor. That harbor, since then, has been mostly unusable, but Russian salvage efforts were able to either strip the ship apart or scuttle it and then scrap it, one or the other, because we do not hear of that ship now blocking that port for much longer. Outside of that, drones have been reported to be exploding on these oil silos here in the northern end of the city, these oil silos being used in conjunction with the port to transport vital fuels for the Russian armed forces to work with. We can hear a video clip of the Ukrainian strikes that did occur on Feodosia just under an hour ago. We can see an explosion right there. It looks like this one was actually a little bit above ground.
Is this a Russian filming those?
A Ukrainian in occupied Crimea is most likely filming this from what we know, because they're a civilian. But we can see the air defense continue to fire, and then we can hear the large explosion of a drone impact in that video. And another one from a distance.
That was a big one.
Yeah, that was a tremor right there. That was really a pretty heavy hit, but of course being heard from many miles away. But beyond that, from what we're understanding, the oil silos have a high possibility of being hit. Unfortunately, we don't have any real video and picture evidence to work with at the moment to really confirm the extent of damage that has been caused to this oil silo, or this oil depot more so. I have to remind everyone that oil silos and depots are some of the most important targets that the Ukrainians can strike so far in the war. Really, the Russian refining and refined oils products industry is a major target for the Ukrainians over the course of the war. While Russia is one of the largest oil-producing nations in the world, but nobody takes the title from the good old US of A, we are actually the largest, the Russians have a very limited ability to produce meaningful oils and fuels out of the crude oil that they extract from inside of their country, leading them to have an actual limited supply of strategic fuel reserves while having a pretty much unending amount of crude oils. Usually, Russian crude oils are transported to ports like Ust-Luga near St. Petersburg and then shipped in its crude oil form to the nation that it is being exported to, and then an oil refinery in that country further refines that crude oil into a usable fuel. It's been a bit of a misnomer that massive amounts of oil production equal massive amounts of fuel reserves and usable fuel for a nation to use. And specifically in Russia's instance, there is actually a very limited amount of strategic fuel reserves that they actually have. And the Ukrainians, like we're seeing here in Feodosia, are starting to chip away at those greatly. This drone attack was so severe from what we can tell on an official governmental level that the Russians have already panicked and shut down the Kerch bridge in response to the attack that occurred over, I believe, 50 miles away from the base of the western side of the bridge. And I am almost right on the money. It was 55 miles away. But nevertheless, we did hear that the Russian officials have shut down the bridge in the meantime, practically immediately after this attack, amid the report of explosions that were coming from Feodosia. The bridge's air defense.
I like how paranoid the Russians are at this point about that bridge being hit. They are so scared that the Ukrainians want to take that out so bad that they'll shut it down at like the slightest thing like happening anywhere in any proximity to that bridge. They're closing it down, get off the bridge, and like deploy the smoke screens. It's crazy, man. Like the littlest things set them off on that.
I know, it's crazy how sensitive they've gotten about that bridge. That thing is like the litmus test for what's going on in the area. If anything happens in the Crimean Peninsula anymore, or even on the southern coastline of Ukraine near Berdyansk and Mariupol, the bridge almost always gets shut down at this point. But it's always shut down about pretty serious incidents, and this is a fairly serious one for oil depots to be attacked like that in Feodosia. So it looks as though, based off of the Kerch Bridge litmus test, it looks like this attack on Feodosia may have ended up being devastating to the Russians and a severe one, and freaked out the Russians so badly about the damage being caused to the oil depots in such a short span of time that they automatically just shut down the Kerch Bridge in response to that attack. But this wasn't the only drone attack that the Ukrainians were able to conduct today. As a matter of fact, in northern Russia at St. Petersburg, we did hear of another Ukrainian attack, apparently trying to target some of the Russian harbor facilities within the city of St. Petersburg. Very recently, in the war's history, we saw that Ukrainian forces, in the form of drones, attempted to attack the oil docks in, more so port, of Ust-Luga, about 550 miles away from the Ukrainian border. This port here serves to be St. Petersburg's in northern Russia's primary connection to the outside world for crude oil exports and also fuel imports. This port has been seriously damaged, and we have not seen anything change that since. But one thing we have heard is that apparently the Ukrainians actually tried to target the interior part of the St. Petersburg port today. We're assuming that this area is around these port facilities here in the southwestern side of the city. There are a limited number of port facilities, but wildly smaller ones here in the northern side of the city. But nevertheless, we're highly doubting that the attacks originated there, because this is actually a marina that's attached to Latka Center, which is the tallest building within the Russian Federation, pictured right there. Beyond that, we believe that the attacks were targeting this area, and we have several video clips showing the attack coming in, and we also have a little bit of unfortunate news about the end result of these attacks, which it appears that for one of the few times in the Ukrainian drone attack history, this one ended up being unsuccessful and also possibly inadvertently hitting a civilian target. But we're going to be showing y'all the first clip that we have of a drone attack coming in on the city. We can see here the air defense firing, and what you're actually seeing at the beginning of the clip, this bright flash up in the sky, is actually the cloud cover at nighttime reflecting back onto the camera the exhaust of the missile as it's discharged from its S-300. And you see that right there, and the missile is traveling right down there. It ends up hitting something, or at least attempting to hit it, and I would have to say, based off of the explosion from after the missile appears to have hit its target, it looks like the drone may have actually been destroyed that was targeted in this clip. We then had an additional clip giving us the sound of explosions coming from inside of the city, and also once again showing us that the Russians were attempting to try and shoot down any kind of incoming drones. What we're seeing in this clip is a streak from the missile that was fired. We believe that this is the missile from the last clip, but a second additional perspective of it. You see the missile streak right there, and we see a giant watermark that says brief. And this video is quite brief. It was a very true watermark. But that's the end of that clip. But unfortunately, it appears that out of everything that happened hours ago during that attack that we covered way earlier on in the day, it seems as though the port attack ended up being unsuccessful and no Ukrainian drones made it to their target. We don't know the exact details behind what happened here in this next bit of news I'm about to show y'all coming from St. Petersburg, but it appears that one of the drones may have been hit and the falling debris may have hit an apartment, or the missile may have hit the drone and then it veered downwards towards an apartment building and exploded on it, or this was falling debris from a Russian surface-to-air missile system. Nevertheless, we did get to see that apparently a decent amount of damage was caused by a drone or something involved in this drone-related incident crashing onto an apartment, which we can see in this clip right here.
Awfully quiet.
It is awfully quiet. It's probably about to get really... There we go. And there was the explosion. It appears to have been at the base of the apartment block, and we're going to go back here really quickly. It looks like that was...
Damn.
Let's see if we can catch the drone. It was coming in pretty quickly, actually. Let's see. There it is. I cannot tell y'all. It looks like a Ukrainian drone. But the interesting thing is that the Ukrainian drone was not tilted down at a normal angle, because this is most likely the drone that was shot down in the prior clip, or it may have been another one that ended up getting damaged and taken down by Russian ground fire. But nevertheless, one thing that we can notice is that it's not on a normal attack vector. Whenever drones finally commit to their final dive into their target, especially kamikaze drones, they usually just tilt directly downwards. You don't see any kind of banking action being taken, and this is suggesting that this drone may have been disabled and had gone out of control and maybe inadvertently hit the base of this apartment building. But nevertheless, hitting the bottom
Kind
of
of
it...
weird for all that explosive power behind a drone of that size, that when it hit the building, it really didn't like cause the explosion to go out to the right where this camera's recording from. It kind of just stayed localized right inside the building right there.
Yeah, it is pretty interesting. Maybe it's because the body of the drone went into the building itself, so the wall kind of concealed a good bit of the explosion from heading out towards the camera, and that's why it looked like it was so contained. Nevertheless, we haven't heard of anyone being wounded or killed in this explosion, fortunately, but nevertheless, it looks to be a little bit of an unfortunate situation. At the same time, however, I do have to mention that while this seems to be a little bit odd or a little bit questionable, and some people are going to start saying, well, you know, maybe that's not a great thing for the Ukrainians to try and conduct these attacks due to the possibility of unfortunate civilian casualties happening, I do have to remind y'all that we do not show a lot of Russian drone attacks of a similar vein here on this channel. Around 6 individual drone attacks happened today by the Russians on bordered villages, resulting in the deaths of approximately 7 civilians across the entirety of the Russian-Ukrainian border in just the past 24 hours. So the Russians in St. Petersburg, if there were any in that apartment, should be really counting their blessings, because they could be like the Ukrainians, getting mercilessly attacked by the Russians, which actually does result in deaths and wounded. But moving on from that news inside of St. Petersburg, and getting us ready for the massive news coming out of southern Russia, it's now time to take us towards the city of Yekaterinburg, where we got to see clear proof today of anti-Russian partisan actions knocking out vital war industry inside of one of Russia's largest cities. From what I understand, Yekaterinburg is the 4th largest city in the Russian Federation. The first one is Moscow, second one St. Petersburg, third one is Novosibirsk, and this is the 4th largest one. The partisans that blew up the bomb inside of this electrical substation, apparently from what we've been told, were able to knock it offline, at least when the news was reported, and deprive 3 major munitions factories within Yekaterinburg of power to operate off of. We know that this is probably going to be repaired fairly soon. This will probably be a several days gap of production for these 3 factories at the moment, but that 3-day gap could be a massive hindrance to the Russians, especially if these plants are some of the major ones producing munitions for the Russian army. That may actually start to cause a lot of logistical problems further down the line. However, we do not know if any of these 3 factories have backup generators that they could operate off of until the main substation they feed from is restored. So we don't know if these factories are completely offline, and that story still has not been cleared up in the past 7 hours or so before the stream, but we did get to see some anti-Russian partisan action in this clip. And at the very first second of this video, you'll see the huge explosion happening inside of the substation from the partisans' bomb. We see the explosion right there. And from what they said, this did end up causing critical damage to the substation and knocking it offline. When you see them showing it time and time again, because it is just a tried and true classic. But still,
Man, let that sink in.
Let that sink. That's a classic, Matthew. A absolute unmitigated classic. But moving on from that little clip inside of Ekaterinburg, it's time for me to now take y'all down to our final appetizer before the main dish inside of the Russian Federation as far as our news goes tonight, which is that another Russian missile has fallen short within the Krasnodar Krai Oblast of the Russian Federation. Russian strategic bombers usually fly from their bases at Ingles Air Base and also, I believe, let me think, it's Ryazan and Ingles Air Base at Saratov. They usually fly from these two major air bases and towards the area of Astrakhan at the very mouth of the Volga River, and then fire off their cruise and ballistic missiles targeted at Ukraine. This gives these bombers a large amount of leeway to work with. They're also flying in very safe airspace, and not only that, it gives the missiles some travel time to be able to get ready to hit their targets. Most of these missiles, after they're launched from near Astrakhan or inside the Caspian Sea, end up flying over the area of the Krasnodar Krai Oblast or the Rostov Oblast, both of these being pretty much the only corridors that Russian missiles take at this point in the war. This means that when a lot of them run into engine failures, most of them end up ditching in the fields around Krasnodar Krai. This one specifically was near a place that was very, very well known just a few days ago. The little village of Novschervodnovskaya. And you can see that right up there. And this is a very significant village, because this was the exact village that the A-50 mainstay was shot down at. So pretty funny to see that a Russian missile failed and crash landed into a field at the exact same place that an A-50 mainstay ended up going down about a week and a half to 2 weeks ago. But we can see the remnants of this KH-35 pretty much pile-drived into the ground right here, and showing us, apparently, that these little missiles that the Russians are trying to use these days are not as effective as they once were. And I gotta say, it's nice to see, and once again showing that Russian war industry is starting to have higher quality control issues and looking for even worse munitions. But speaking of worse and worse situations for the Russian war industry, we have literally one more thing before we get to the big news in Ingushetia. And that is that we have heard from the British Ministry of Defense that the Russian Air Force is going to be grounding their entire A-50 mainstay fleet into the foreseeable future, probably throughout the rest of the war. We've heard this because Russian A-50 mainstays have been shot down in the northern Sea of Azov, as well as over Krasnodar Krai, and it does appear that there's still a decent amount of controversy as to how that A-50 was shot down. Some, like our channel, is saying that it was shot down accidentally by Russian air defense in one of the worst friendly fire incidents that has been seen in modern history. Others are saying that it was a modified S-200 Ukrainian surface-to-air missile that was able to travel somehow hundreds of miles from its launch site all the way to the A-50 and end up shooting it down. Regardless of whatever theory we're going with, the A-50 was in fact shot down, even after it was flying over the Krasnodar Krai Oblast of the Russian Federation, over 200 miles away from the Ukrainian front line, and at that distance almost being completely ineffective at its actual role of trying to provide early warning of incoming missiles to Russian forces, and also coordinating efforts on the ground with Russian commanders. Because of this, the Russians have decided that it would be a lot more efficient and a lot more economical to just ground the fleet and work with the worsened communications issues that they'll be having with a large part of the Russian army inside of Ukraine, and to also deal with the complete lack of having any kind of an early warning system aircraft airborne in the area to let Russians know of possible impending strikes that may be hitting frontline positions or even rear line positions inside of Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, or Zaporizhia, or even Crimea. It appears that the Ukrainians...
I like how the Kyiv Independent, by the way, said in that reply post to this tweet, it said Russia has likely stopped flying its A-50 due to the downing of a second one. That's a great observation. I got to tell you what, that's probably why they grounded them, because they don't want them to get shot down anymore.
Oh, they do not want these to get shot down anymore. They have about 6 of them left. And out of all of those, each one of them costs a nice, good, even $500 million a piece to produce. So they're certainly not wanting to lose any more of these, because a loss of an A-50 mainstay is irreplaceable, both because of the aircraft's importance and also because of the sheer cost of each aircraft. A single A-50 mainstay command aircraft costs the exact same price of a Moskva-class battlecruiser, which for most fleets within the Russian Navy, a Moskva battlecruiser is the flagship of their fleet, giving you an idea of how expensive and how irreplaceable the A-50 mainstays really are. But moving on from that news, it's time for us to finally get on down into southern Russia and talk about what happened inside of this region today. I have had so much time to be able to try and go back and talk exactly in detail about what's happened down here today, because we've been talking about this on this channel for 8 months now, on and off. This is something that a lot of people don't know, and a lot of people, when hearing the news today about an armed rebellion or an armed uprising within the Ingushetia Oblast, many people met that with great skepticism and said that we were merely trying to push false news or make up some kind of a fictitious scenario to make it sound a little interesting. That is not at all the case. We actually brought up this group a very long time ago, and that brings us to today's video that I made a little bit earlier. Let me make sure to go grab it, because I have to show you all this and kind of do a lot of explaining, because I actually do have a lot of explaining to do here to back up the story that I told y'all today in the news. So, y'all are looking at the video that was put out today that has gotten like 110,000 views and is done incredibly good. But beyond that, that is not the point. We need to go down here to this description, because I told everyone in the video that the link to the video was in the description. It is right there. It is the Max Nafo fella's Twitter. You can go there and check out the video yourself. But on top of that, our first mention of these Ingush rebels inside of Ingushetia came from a stream called The Armed Uprising in Russia. This stream ran 6 months ago on August 5th of 2023, and for the first 20 to 30 minutes of this entire stream, we went into great detail about the Ingush rebels, their reason for rebelling, on top of that, their official statement that they were going to be fighting against the Russian Federation to try and free the Oblast of Ingushetia from the Russians, and to also reclaim land that was given away by the Russian government, and the Ingush people, of course, being put into a diaspora across the Soviet Union during the times of Stalin. We went into all of this in great detail on day 528 of the war, and several hundred days after that, really, honestly, almost, almost 250 days after that point, or really 210 or so, we are now full circle, and these Ingush rebels have actually risen up and started a firefight today within the town of Karabalak, one of the larger ones within the Oblast of Ingushetia. But if y'all want to know a lot more about these people, because I'm not wanting to go into a lot of detail on them tonight, because it would be a little redundant considering we covered this nearly 8 months ago. But if y'all want to see a lot more detail, just go to the link in the description to today's video, click on that stream that I put in the links, and you can go all the way back in time to around 210 days ago when these people first popped up and we first knew about their existence. But they have slowly been growing and building up in the background, and we were finally able to see that today they got in some heavy firefights within Karabalak with the Russian FSB. We have 2 clips showing this. The first one came from Twitter and was the one that we had on the video clip today, but it gives us the sound of heavy firefights coming from Karabalak in between the Ingush Free Army, or the Ingushetia Free Army, and the Russian FSB. You hear the sound of heavy firefights happening outside.
Oh,
it looks
sounds
like
like the Ingush are well armed with explosives too.
Sounds like someone whipped out the G. Someone whipped out the RPG. Yeah, someone whipped out the RPG right there at the end of the clip. But that's the end of that clip, and we have a second one also letting us hear additional sounds of heavy firing and gunfights within the city of Karabalak. And here's this clip in addition to the first one. Hold up. I be did. This is the wrong link. There was actually 2 separate videos. One of them was filmed. I'll try and explain the other one that apparently didn't get translated over on just stream. There was another video that was taken of the Russian FSB rolling into the city with an armored car. It was kind of near like a white or a grayish SUV. They dismounted the vehicles and ended up getting in a firefight, and most of it was caught on film. For some reason...
It's actually 3 posts down on our homepage of our profile on Twitter.
Oh, so we actually have that one.
Yeah, it's reposted.
Nice. Let me go grab that one real quick. Sorry, y'all. There was a incident there where apparently I went and copied the link for the wrong one. So let me make sure to scroll down and find ourselves this one. You know what? Thank you so much, Matthew. You are a legend, because this is the actual video I was talking about right here. This is the
No
white...
problem. Anytime, man.
Yeah, the absolute legend. Matthew, coming in clutch. But this right here is the car I was talking about, the white grayish SUV. It's not an SUV, but I got the color of the car right. Oh, you hear the sound of the heavy firefight happening inside a car block. From what we understand, this is an ongoing firefight, or the firefight has ended. Sadly, we haven't really gotten a lot of follow-up with this firefight and where it went. The Russians are, of course, claiming that everything is just fine and everyone should remain calm and nothing is happening in Ingushetia, but of course we already have the video footage that's showing that that's a flat-out lie, and there's a lot going on in Ingushetia as we're running the stream right now. The Ingush Free Army, or the Ingushetia Free Army, is a group of Russian separatists, a lot like the Chechen separatists of the 90s and the early 2000s, that use partisan, or what could be even described as guerrilla warfare tactics to try and liberate their region. From what we have what we have understood, we have not seen these guys in any kind of a heavy firefight or even engaging Russian forces since their inception way back in September, at least as far as we've been able to track on this channel. This is the first time that we've ever seen an actual firefight occur in between Russian forces and the Ingushetia Free Army in their entire existence, showing that apparently they've finally been able to be armed well enough and trained well enough, at least according to their own expertise, to be able to engage Russian forces in guerrilla warfare tactics throughout some of the major towns within this oblast. They're most likely hiding within the southern foothills, or really the northern foothills of the Caucasus Mountain range, which are covered in forests and very hard for Russian forces to be able to access. A very similar thing happened within the Autonomous Republic of Chechnya, which Ingushetia is also an autonomous republic as well, way back in the 90s as well as the 2000s, when the First and Second Chechen Wars unfolded. The Chechen rebels would end up hiding inside of the northern foothills of the Caucasus Mountain range, and it would take nearly 7 to 8 years for the Russian army to truly wipe out those separatists. It probably will take the same amount of time to be able to do something to the Ingushetia Free Army, as once again, much like the Chechens, they are using partisan or guerrilla warfare tactics to engage Russian forces, Russian federal forces, as well as the Russian armed forces, and these attacks are mostly going to be sporadic and happen over a long amount of time. I would not expect any kind of major change happening within Russia because of this firefight that happened today as a part of this armed uprising, because armed uprisings like these work over a long period of time with sporadic firefights in between. There's no such thing as a revolution like one would have seen during the times of the Russian Revolution in 1917, where a massive armed force rises up and it's an actual full-on conventional war that is pretty much occurring in between both sides. The Ingush people are a very small group of people, and on top of that, live within quite a small oblast. And so because of that, they're going to have to be working over a very long period of time, a lot like the IRA would have operated in Northern Ireland during the Troubles, to actually try and create any kind of progress, and even then, their progress may be completely non-existent on trying to achieve their goals. But nevertheless, they will be tying up a large amount of Russian resources and efforts, much like was tied up during the Chechen Wars as well as the Troubles in the United Kingdom's Northern Ireland region. And that may lead to the Russians having to divert war efforts and resources away from Ukraine and into the areas around Ingushetia to try and make sure that this rebellion and uprising does not continue on any further. We have also seen that in the past, pro-Russian sentiments within the Caucasus Mountain region in Russia have been incredibly low. We even saw massive riots occur within the major city of Vladikavkaz, which is right next door to the Ingushetia Oblast. Unfortunately, I can't remember the name of this oblast off the top of my head at the moment, and maybe if we click on Vladikavkaz, it'll give us... So this is in the Alania Republic, or the Alania Autonomous Republic of the Russian Federation. But nevertheless, we saw a major riot occur here, specifically due to the Russian government conscripting a large amount of Caucasus Mountain region's peoples instead of actual Russians from Western Russia, or more so northwestern Russia. But nevertheless, it is very good to see that the Russians are getting engaged in firefights with separatists within this region, as hopefully this will be tying up vital resources that could be used inside of Ukraine. Moving on out of that separatist revolt, we also got to hear that within Crimea, apparently the Black Sea Fleet's headquarters is still in ruins, according to satellite footage that just came out the other day. This was taken on the 28th of February, and from what we can see, the Black Sea Fleet headquarters still stands in the same derelict and destroyed condition that it stood in just a day after it was attacked by Ukrainian Storm Shadow and Scalp EG missiles. It appears that the Russians have no inclination to even try and restore or rebuild the building, and they've decided to probably move the Black Sea Fleet's headquarters to another building within the area of the city of Sevastopol. Nevertheless, we're always happy to see that the Ukrainians' damage is going to be long-lasting to the Russian military, and something that not even the Russians believe they can actually recover from. But moving on out of that news inside of Crimea, and really moving out of all of our Russian news as a whole today, it's time to start moving on towards the Ukrainian battle actions that have occurred over the past 24 hours, which have produced some pretty interesting results. Starting off in the area around Tetkino and Popovo-Lizachi, we got to see that apparently a substation got hit today by a Ukrainian drone bomber. And we're going to be muting the 70s, like talk show.
1970s, lovely music. I love it.
And we can see the substation getting hit right there.
Seemed like the Russian substations were having a tough time today.
It seems as though they were, but nevertheless, it's always nice to see that the substations are having a little bit of a problem being a station at all. Not just being a substation, they're just non-existent stations. But moving on from that little substation getting detonated today by drone bombs, this now moves us on into the Ukrainian location unknowns. Before we get into that, we have to, of course, circle back into that Ingushetia region, because this is something that I've seen some people bringing up in the chat, and I've actually seen a lot of comments. I've actually seen one of our longtime channel viewers trying to say that it doesn't sound like a major issue. But I can assure you that wherever there's an armed uprising at all, no matter how little information we have, it's always going to be a major issue to the country that's having to deal with this armed uprising. You have to remember that armed uprisings are something that countries really don't like to have, no matter how big they are or how small they are. The Russians have dealt with armed uprisings within this region ever since it came under Russian control in the early part of the 1800s. And even since then, they've continued to have a very hard time trying to control this group of Caucasus Mountain Range people, or as they were once called, the Circassians, the Chechens, and many other groups. And it appears that they're still having that problem to this day. But many people have many different comments about this. Some people say that this isn't that big of a deal, and, well, much like Dante did, and it won't turn into much, which is maybe a fair argument. Some other people say that this is a serious sign of major unrest within the Russian Federation that could possibly be exploited by Ukraine or Western-aligned countries to try and sow further dissent and disorganization within Russia, and also tie up vital war efforts and materials trying to suppress internal rebellions instead of focusing them on the war effort in Ukraine. But so many people have had so many different comments about this that I'm going to have to ask you, Matthew, what in the world have people been saying, and what do you really think about what's going on down there?
All right, so on the topic of the uprising in Ingushetia, or how it's pronounced, I have a tough time with that word, the FSB actually opened fire on the fighters, as we saw in that video, and it looks like the majority of folks, 45%, said it's a sign of major unrest in Russia, while only 30% said it's a localized riot and not that serious. And to me, because of the region and the history of that area, I would say it's more likely than not a localized riot. And while it is serious, it's not going to be, spreading to basically every part of Russia where all the Russians are rising up and starting gunfights in the streets against the Russian government. I don't think that's going to happen. And like the Enforcer said, I think it's basically because of the history in the area. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that it is a sign of unrest. I wouldn't say that it's a sign of major unrest across all of Russia, but I would say that this is a certain serious thing for the Russians. The Russians consider the uprisings within this region to be quite severe, especially considering this is very close to the corridor that they have with Azerbaijan by land to reach Iran and other countries within the Middle East. That means that anything happening within this region gets a strategic priority over really any other part of Russia. Something can happen in Siberia, and it won't really mean a lot for the Russians, because Siberia is mostly isolated to itself, and there's not really a lot that can actually come out of anything that happens in that area unrest-wise. However, in an area like southwestern Russia, where the land corridor exists with them, Iran, and other countries in the Middle East, this is a major thing for them to try and deal with and crush. And while this is probably going to be very localized, and I believe this will not really span outwards into the rest of Russia, this will be a major concern for the Russians to try and quell and put down, because if the Ingushetian uprising starts to kick off even further, which it appears that it's a slow burner, but it's certainly starting to finally pick up and take off since 8 months ago when we first found out that this group existed and they declared open warfare against the Russian government, this kind of a mindset could start to spread to the people nearby to Ingushetia that may not be Ingush people, but nevertheless hate the Russian government. The Chechens are certainly one of the largest groups that could rise up if the Ingushetian uprising begins to go well, and the Russians kind of allow them a laissez-faire kind of mindset where the Ingush people can do whatever they want, uprise however much they want, and end up being as successful as possible. People like the Chechens could take that as a very positive sign that an uprising in their region would also produce similar results. And that's why the Russians are probably going to put a high priority on diverting war efforts and materials into Ingushetia to conduct what they would call counterterrorism operations and to try and crush the Ingushetia Free Army before they can actually pick up any kind of leeway, momentum, or steam that would lead to surrounding oblasts or autonomous republics attempting uprisings against the Russians. It could span out of control. Right now it's contained though, so it's not going to be a sign of major unrest across all of Russia, but it certainly will be something that the Russians put a decent amount of time and effort into trying to deal with. At least in my opinion. And of course, I have to say this. Everyone is right when they answer a poll. There's no such thing as a wrong answer, even if it contradicts my opinion. My opinion is just an opinion, and everyone has an opinion, just like everyone has a mouth to speak with. But beyond that, one thing that is very important to remember is that right now, this could really go in any direction. This could end up fizzling out and dying, or this could end up continuing to escalate and grow. And so I don't want anyone to think that your opinion is wrong just because Matthew and me may disagree with the other poll options. It's more so just what everyone is thinking at the moment about this and what we think this may turn into. And right now, at this point, this is anyone's game. This could turn into nothing, or it could turn into a major ordeal. But I certainly think that over the past 8 months, from when we first found out that this group existed to 8 months later, they're finally starting to get into actual firefights with Russian federal forces. This is starting to show to me that they're on an upwards trend onto becoming a major ordeal instead of a downwards trend to where they're starting to fizzle out and disappear. But nevertheless, we're going to be moving on from that little bit of news in the southern Caucasus region and back into Ukraine to start getting towards our location unknown news. But before we get into that, well, actually, we'll save that for just a little bit. I was looking at that one. We'll allow y'all to talk about that one a little bit more. We've asked y'all a brand new question on what y'all think about another major ordeal that's happened today, but we'll be circling around to that right after our location unknown news and giving that a lot more in-depth talking and kind of conversation about what this means. But moving on from that, we did get to see an Mi-24 firing off U.S.-supplied Hydra rockets today. Check this out. Hydra rockets.
Oh, that slow-mo is crazy.
Oh yeah, caught in 4K Ultra HD right there. Just look at that. And this is the classic Mi-24P. This thing has pretty much a gush gun mounted onto the side of the Mi-24 instead of a turreted 12.7mm Gatling gun, which apparently it produces better firepower in any given moment. But, you know, it's got a bit of an issue, and I'll try and explain. So let me see if I can find a picture here of this thing. Yeah, you know what? We got two of them here. I had to go see if Wikipedia has pictures. So this is an Mi-24W. And this is what a lot of people think of when they think of an Mi-24, is they think of the small little turret right here, right below the gunner's cockpit on the helicopter that has a 12.7mm Gatling gun that can actually be rotated and fired at targets that aren't directly in line with the helicopter's flight path. However, the Mi-24P is a lot more common of a version of the Mi-24 attack helicopter. And you can see here that the turret that's holding the 12.7mm Gatling gun was removed, and instead they replaced that gun with a 23mm dual-barreled gush gun, pretty much, that is mounted sideways onto the Mi-24. The problem with this is that while it provides higher firepower, you also have to aim the helicopter like it's a World War II warbird at its target, meaning that you pretty much have to point the entire helicopter at whatever you're trying to shoot, which can end up causing some problems, especially when you have an inexperienced pilot trying to also work with the gunner to get this thing on board. But still, at the same time, it's a very common helicopter, and that was something that I was noting here in this clip, is that you can see here on this Ukrainian Mi-24, it's the classic, pretty much ubiquitous Mi-24, the Mi-24P. But moving on from that, and a small rabbit hole about the variants of helicopters that exist of the Mi-24, it's time for us to move on into our next little bit of news, where we got to hear a very special piece made by United 24 about the Ukrainian special forces and what they've been doing across the entirety of the front lines of Ukraine from the very beginning of the war. This is not really an analysis of a specific part of the special forces, such as the snipers or such as the rear line groups. This is just the special forces as a whole. But here is the documentary, the incredibly made documentary today by United 24.
Call sign, Ned. Profession, Special Forces Intelligence Operator.
PMC Wagner, Russian intelligence, and airborne troops are formidable enemies, trained and experienced. However, in direct confrontation with us, the enemy is usually forced to retreat. It's difficult to calculate precisely, but during the full-scale invasion, the personnel were destroyed definitely reached thousands, and the equipment hundreds of units. My call sign is Ned. I'm the commander of a detachment within Timur's unit of the Defense Intelligence, GER, of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine. I won't disclose details, but the intelligence operatives at GER have numerous means of reconnaissance and enemy engagement. These means fly in the air, travel on land, move on water, and underwater.
Cinematic tools of Ukrainian intelligence include, for example, miniature drones like the Black Hornet.
During assault operations, we fly into a building to survey the situation and detect possible enemy presence. In reality, we do have something similar to James Bond. There are specialists who operate like spies from the movies. Such people don't wear camouflage. They can work undercover behind enemy lines, gather secret data, and sabotage.
Now, I do have to say this really quickly. Those kind of operatives are actually in a very dangerous position because the rules of war do not provide any protection to soldiers who are trying to disguise themselves as civilians or in enemy uniforms. Those guys can end up being executed on the spot even under the rules of war. Just putting that out there. So those guys are undertaking a very dangerous kind of a mission to even go behind the lines and be dressed up as a civilian or dressed up possibly, although this would be a violation of the rules of war, as an enemy soldier, because that immediately comes with it. If you're discovered, you're executed almost on the spot.
There are also special forces. These are more traditional fighters who directly engage in combat on the front lines and behind enemy lines.
When asked about the classic movie plot where a lone fighter takes down enemies by the dozen, Ned responds briefly.
It happens. Of course, rarely, but it happens. When we arrived to conduct an operation, soldiers there asked, "Guys, who are you?" But no one was supposed to know that we were the Defense Intelligence of Ukraine. Because if the enemy found out we were there, they would immediately try to strengthen their positions, knowing that we could act quite boldly and strike from anywhere. So we always responded simply, "Nobody." That's how we got our name. However, though people usually nod their heads, it's evident they don't quite believe us. It's obvious we're not locals.
3 main types of tasks for the GER Scout are working undercover behind enemy lines, direct combat on the front lines, and sabotage reconnaissance activities. Each type requires a separate set of equipment.
Let's look at the weaponry a scout can use deep behind enemy lines. For example, there is an undercover agent who has infiltrated an enemy enterprise with a task to eliminate a high...
Hold up, is that an UMP? Is that like an UMP 45?
An UMP?
Yeah, let me check that out. UMP 45. That looks a lot like a UMP 45 to me.
That's one of those Swiss-made guns, I believe. I think.
HK?
Not HK. It's Thompson and Brugger or something like that. I don't know the exact name. I'm butchering it, but it's something like that. It's a Swiss-made gun, I think.
Thompson and Ruger. I think that's
Same
like
people that make the Secret Service guns.
Sadly, I can't find anything than bagels when I pull that up, but I know the company you're talking about, and they do make the Secret Services.
B&T, that's it.
Okay, so let's pull that up. B&T, and they do make the UMP-45. So let me see if I can find the picture of this here. It appears that H&K also makes one as well. Let's see. I can't tell what kind that really is, but I think the closest one I can get to that is... Dang, I really cannot find one that looks a lot... Oh, here we go. Maybe that's the closest one. Is this one right here. That looks a lot like it, kind of, sort of, not really, but, you know, kind of get the picture. Anyways, back to the video.
Agent who has infiltrated an enemy enterprise with a task to eliminate a high-value target. His weapon must be compact, easy to transport, and must allow for covered carrying. It also must have a silencer. A 9x19 caliber is sufficient for this. We have several types of such weapons in our arsenal, both automatic firearms and pistols equipped with silencers. During raids or assault operations, we use CZ Brand 2 assault carbines in 5.56 caliber, or DDM carbines, also in 5.56.
Nice. The
They are
Daniel.
equipped with silent
look
shooting
at that,
device.
dude. The
Hey,
Daniel
that's my
Defense
gun, man.
makes a debut. Look at that, man. That's nice.
Yeah,
that's really nice.
that's a solid gun. That thing is a smooth shooter. A very excellent choice.
Man, and also, they got some really nice machine guns here, too, but I'll let him talk about that.
Flashlights and laser pointers. We also use light machine guns, such as the 5.56 Mini-Me. Its advantages include small dimensions and relatively lightweight. We also utilize a 308 caliber machine gun. It's a very powerful weapon in the hands of our scouts.
The MG5.
Knife, tourniquet, waist pouch for carrying additional equipment, grenade pouches, front magazine pouches, and also on the back I have an assault panel where I can also place grenades, magazines, and additional gear. Helmet equipped with night vision device for night operations, active earphones, and an additional battery for the night vision device. A part of a sabotage reconnaissance group typically uses semi-automatic sniper rifles in 308 caliber. Mine has a thermal imaging front attachment. We also use Remington 700 sniper rifles in caliber 308 or caliber 338 Lapua Magnum.
I love to hear
For
it.
nighttime operations, we use carbines of 300 blackout caliber, which allow working silently at short distances.
Isn't that a honey
Man,
badger?
they've got my whole loadout, man. That's basically a honey badger, like the SBR type of weapon. I'm not sure if it was like a less than 16 inches or not, but they've got the Daniel, the honey badger type thing with 300 blackout. They're loaded out. They've got the big old machine gun. It's impressive.
Man, it really is impressive, and it just goes
As for
on.
a short pistol, we use the 6-hour M18.
Damn. They have good
Engineering
taste.
equipment is necessary too, because the territory may be mined, so we have to check it. This includes 25 to 30 meters of paracord, grappling hooks, and a collapsible mine prodder with a tip. Trash bags. The enemy should not know that anyone was here at all. Trampled grass, footprints on the ground, and waste can compromise our presence, so we take everything with us, leaving nothing behind. During sabotage reconnaissance operations, instead of a bulletproof vest, we use a chest rig, also a sling system or war belt. Going into enemy territory means having to cover a long distance with a fairly heavy backpack. Plus, if a contact happens, the operation is cancelled. If detected in any way, we must leave the area as quickly as possible.
Sometimes, Girl Scouts help others leave the area. Say, in September 2023, CNN reported that Ukrainian fighters could have carried out attacks on the Wagner PMC in Sudan, 4,000 kilometers from Ukraine. Ukrainian intelligence neither confirmed nor denied their involvement. However, the head of the GER, Kirilo Budanov, noted Ukraine will act against its enemies all around the globe. Ned keeps the secrecy intact. To most questions about specific operations, he responds classified. However, he nonetheless shared some details.
It was a raid into the occupied Nova Kakhovka. At that time, no one had landed on the left bank of Dnipro. We were tasked with carrying out a classic fire raid. During the mission, we destroyed a BTR-82A, burned down the enemy command post, and eliminated 10 to 11 enemies. The enemy simply didn't expect anyone to cross the river directly into their trenches and land like that. They panicked and mobilized all reserves, which helped us learn about the units stationed there, their equipment, and their reaction time.
Another legendary amphibious operation was at the Potemkin Islands.
Russian intelligence units were there. We had direct contact with them and eliminated them. By the time we arrived, the Potemkin Islands were about 80% under enemy control. When we left, about 70% were ours. In the Horlivka direction, together with the 24th Separate Mechanized Brigade, we were able to reclaim territory for Ukraine that had been under occupation since 2014.
Bakhmut was another famous area where the GUR intelligence worked.
At that time, the enemy was desperately trying to surround Bakhmut with all its might, leaving only the last road for us to hold. Wagner's assaults never stopped. One group would come, we would destroy them, and then another group would follow. I'd never seen anything like it. Basically, layers of bodies were lying all over, meaning that Russians literally walked over their own dead.
Nobody has a different principle.
We never leave our own behind, and we always retrieve the bodies of fallen comrades. If we need to go back for it, we'll go back. If we need to go back 5 times, we'll go 5 times.
On Nobody's Instagram, there's a video of a battle when 2 scouts engaged in combat with a whole group of Wagner fighters during a body evacuation.
We retrieved this comrade's body not just once. When we raised the drones, we initially thought that the body had been taken by the Russians because he was well equipped with a Scar rifle. They might have thought he was some kind of commander. But then we realized that the trench had become shallower. The body was simply buried by artillery explosions. The first time we dug it up, literally 15 meters away from the trench full of Wagner fighters. The first time we dug it out. The next time we moved it across the road, and so we gradually evacuated it. When we finally came to pick it up, the enemy started to approach. Our guys suddenly heard voices very close, within 5 meters. They immediately engaged the enemy, resulting in the elimination and injury of the enemy. Our fighters returned unharmed, and the next day we returned and retrieved the comrade's body.
This is one of many cases where GUR fighters acted independently and swiftly.
The main thing valued in the defense intelligence of Ukraine is initiative, the ability to make quick decisions in critical situations. In the US, there's CIA, in Britain MI6, but currently the level of experience we have, as well as our country's military overall, is unmatched by anyone else in the world. We consist exclusively of volunteers.
I'm glad he's proud. I'll say that.
Yeah, it's good to have pride in your country. It's great. It's good, yeah.
Essentially, for everyone in the main intelligence directorate, coming here was a dream. This motivates them to develop and work even harder. These people wanted to tackle the most difficult tasks, and they do.
Ned's words are confirmed by the video from Nobody's Instagram, where during a mission, one of the fighters shouts, Despite the fact that GUR reconnaissance troops are considered the elite of the Ukrainian military, Ned himself considers someone else to be the best warrior.
In our unit, we have some very strong individuals. For example, there is a person who in the first days of the full-scale invasion, single-handedly, having only a semi-automatic .308 caliber rifle, eliminated 20 targets in the Kyiv region on a normal day. But for me, the best fighters are the ordinary soldiers of the armed forces of Ukraine. I deeply respect these people. They're made of steel. Ordinary guys, aged 45 to 50, with an AK-74 sitting in a trench, for me, that's a true hero.
However, the war of a GUR reconnaissance soldier can last much longer than that of an ordinary infantryman.
Victory for the civilian citizens of Ukraine will come much sooner than victory for a GUR serviceman. For civilians, it's when we reclaim all Ukrainian territories. But there will still be a lot of work for us, and it will take a long time. We won't stop when we reach the borders of 1991. We will continue working to the enemy's head off, so that nothing threatens us in the future.
And that's the end of the clip from United 24, but giving y'all a deep insight into the GRU, a group of the Ukrainian Special Forces that we've mentioned and shown clips of here on this channel before, but have rarely ever gotten into great detail on what they are and what they really do. And so hopefully that clears up a lot of details about what the GRU really is and what their actual mission in the war currently is at the moment. But moving on from that, and down south, just for a quick moment before we go through the rest of the location unknowns, because this was kind of a little bit of a location unknown thing as well today, 2 Russian Su-34s were once again shot down again over the past 24 hours. At this moment, when this post was put out, only 1 of the Su-34s had been shot down, but in between this post and when this stream ran, a second additional Su-34 had also been shot down. Going off of this, a lot of people are talking about the heavy attrition rates that the Russians are still continuing to suffer on a day-to-day basis for their Air Force. And Matthew, I understand that a lot of people have been talking about that, and a lot of people have loads of input to make about what's becoming of the Russian Air Force over the past 2 weeks.
So yes, indeed. We find out that the Ukrainians have shot down 2 more Russian fighter jets, and the Russian Air Force has temporarily ceased operations. And we asked the audience, which is all of y'all, what are your thoughts? And 55% said Russia's Air Force is 90% ineffective at least, and 20% said it's only temporary and Russia will return, and 17% said Russia's Air Force is only slightly weakened. And to me, at the rate they're losing aircraft, I wouldn't say that they're down for the count just yet, because the Russians aren't going to just simply ground all their aircraft forever and never return. They will return. But for them to ground their stuff, even temporarily, that's a big statement. That says they are scared to death to lose any more aircraft, and they're pretty certain at this point that if they put them back up in the air right now, they're going to get shot down. So I'm assuming they're trying to either retrain their pilots or try to give them some pointers or something. Maybe take them to a clinic real quick and try to put some knowledge in their head about how not to get shot down. But they're trying to do something to fix this crisis they're having with their Air Force, losing planes left and right. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that it's pretty funny to see the Russians continue to take such high losses for their Air Force, and I would have to say that it seems as though they're finally starting to get soured by the idea of losing an endless number of Su-34s. It's like unlimited soup and salad for them, but in the bad way, and they're just losing nothing but Su-34s. So going off of that, I have a feeling that they're probably going to sit around and just hope that they don't lose the rest of the Air Force throughout the rest of the war. At least the frontline fighting part of the Air Force, which is at great peril every single time they go into the skies. But I hope that does address that quite well. And I also know that a lot of y'all are still talking about Moldova. We're not covering that in our news tonight, but loads of y'all still have Moldova on your minds. Moldova all the time. I don't know why that sounds like some kind of a song, but nevertheless, a lot of people are saying that it looks like a little bit of a serious situation, and Matthew actually has a little bit more detail about that than I do. And so, Matthew, what do you know about what's happening in Moldova as of today?
So in addition to one breakaway region of Moldova asking for Russia's help to basically liberate themselves from Moldova's control, we've seen another one today ask for Russia's assistance. And then Lavrov came out and said that it looks very similar to what happened right before the Ukrainian invasion started. And that's actually what I noted a few days prior. And now we have Lavrov coming out and saying it out of his own mouth. That Russia might have to act like they did in Ukraine when they invaded it. So pretty strong statement. And we're seeing that 58% said Russia is preparing for annexation, while 27% said Russia is just trying to scare Moldova. And I've got to be honest, like I've said before, it sounds like Russia is basically trying to lay the foundation for a propaganda scheme here to build a justified invasion of the Moldovan breakaway regions, which is going to cause some major tensions with Moldova because they're trying to get into the EU right now. And I think Russia has been trying to destabilize Moldovan's government for a long time, and this is a sure way to try to do that. It would also cause a lot of fear in the West because if they're willing to invade some more territory beyond Ukraine, then that indicates Russia is willing to invade other places as well, which is going to raise tensions even further. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say it certainly sounds like they're preparing. And it's also really interesting to hear that the Russians are the only one who hears the cries of Moldovans instead of anyone else in the world, which tells me again that this is all just a fake thing being made up by the Russians to try and justify military action inside of Moldova. They're probably not going to be able to do anything. They're probably preparing to try and annex Moldova, but in reality, their abilities to try and follow through with that are probably going to be slim to none, and the Russian forces that are currently there are completely cut off from any form of resupply or reinforcement from the larger Russian army that is still inside of Russia or fighting inside of Ukraine, while I sit there and have to gather myself to continue on talking. But nevertheless, I would have to say they're probably preparing for an annexation, but it probably wouldn't go well if they attempted it. So with that, I hope we were able to talk about a small little side thing fairly well about another country possibly being plunged in a war very soon, you know, a little bit small. But I also know that many of y'all have thrown in some questions here in the chat, and I want to make sure that we are able to get around to these questions and make sure to answer them the best we can. And so, Matthew, what do we got?
All right, so first up from our super chats, we have a $25 donation from Gary Robbins, who has been around possibly longer than I've even been on the channel. So Gary is a longtime channel legend, and thank you very much for that support. He says, prayers for Congress to pass the arms for Ukraine, and what can we do to promote that?
Well, what we can do is several things. We can write to our representatives and Congress members, and that's really it. that's really honestly all I can think of, because protesting doesn't really do much in reality. Because, you know, politicians are largely set in their ways, unless if there's something that may threaten them with losing a re-election. Protests don't do that. But writing to them and telling them that you voted for them and that you won't vote for them again unless if they do something in particular, then they'll listen. Because you always have to make sure that whatever is happening is directly impacting someone for them to want to bring about the change. And the change that we're looking for is support to Ukraine. And there's actually a small amount of people, you know, and right now, a lot of people are trying to make it sound like it's half the country that isn't supporting support to Ukraine. But the reality of the situation is that it's more like 25% or so that are actually trying to hang this up, and then a small amount of indecisive people who are kind of allowing them to get a little bit more leeway. But beyond that, if you write to those specific representatives and senators and tell them, I voted for you last election, I find support to Ukraine to be important for A, B, and C, and this is so important to me that I'll vote for whoever candidate coming around this election or whenever you're reelected that will support Ukraine, I'll vote for them, regardless of their policies and regardless of how I voted in the past. That's how you get a representative to actually start changing their mind on their position and to possibly even start moving towards a more pro-Ukrainian stance. There's not really many other better ways to do that in reality. A lot of people always make it sound like there's all kinds of creative ways. I'll tell you this, immolating yourself is the proper way to say that. It will not get anything done. And it's also just really crazy and absolutely insane to do something like that, because I'm sure many of y'all heard about something that happened recently along those lines. That's absolutely insane, doesn't change anyone's minds, and on top of that, you end up dying looking like a loon. The other thing that you could try and do is you could always try and threaten your representatives and senators, but that never really works, and that usually gets you a knock on the door by the FBI asking you, why in the world did you threaten a representative or a senator with bodily harm? That's absolutely insane. So don't do anything like that.
Yeah, don't
That's
do
just
that.
crazy. You know, just throwing out all the ideas that a whole bunch of people put out there, because I'm not saying they're good ideas, I'm just saying what people do. Another thing that people have tried to do in the past is go to Washington, D.C., and then go to the Cannon Building, which the Cannon Building is this little building right here, the Cannon House Office Building, and that's where a lot of representatives of the U.S. House of Representatives work. That's their actual work office in this building, and also the Rayburn House Office Building is another one that U.S. House of Representative members are in. That's where they actually work throughout most of the day. They don't work in the Capitol Building. They just go there to kind of all gather around and sing Kumbaya. But beyond that, some people like to think that if they go to these buildings and they walk in just unannounced, uninvited, and unplanned and talk to one of these representatives' aides instead of the representative themselves, that they feel like that's making some kind of forward progress. And I promise you, it isn't. Talking to aides is completely pointless. A lot of those, and no disrespect to the aides, by the way, because the aides are really the ones who carry the representatives and senators. They do a lot of the clerical work for all of them. But the thing is that because they do all the clerical work, they're kind of just considered to be the grunts of the Congress. And so they don't really have a lot of power to be able to go talk to this representative about what they heard you say today and have that have a lot of sway on them. So that's another thing that won't end up producing any kind of forward progress. And I'm just trying to lay out here. I don't mean to lay out all of these things and point out why they're bad things to do to be a pessimist. I'm just pointing out things that I've seen a lot of virtue signalers do out there over the course of the war so far that end up doing literally nothing, but a lot of people, because they don't understand how the US government works, think that they're doing a great deal. In reality, they're doing nothing but spinning their tires in mud. Really, the only thing you can do is write letters, a lot of them, and of course make sure to put in there that you voted for them. Even if you didn't vote for them, it's fine to stretch the truth a little bit. Maybe you forgot, maybe you did vote for them. In the next election, you're not going to vote for them unless they support Ukraine. That's really the best way I can explain to actually try and get them to vote for what you want. Or, in reality, because it is a democracy after all, if you consider Ukraine support to be the most important thing to you in the entire world, forgetting everything else that happens in America politically, you can just vote in the next election cycle for your representative or your senator for the one that supports Ukraine. I don't know who that would be, because it's a lot of people are trying to make it sound like it's one certain party. That's not the case. It actually is both parties. It really just depends on the candidate that you're talking about. But whoever is supporting the support to Ukraine, just vote for them. And if enough people think that way, and the entire nation wills the support to Ukraine to happen, then the people will be elected that want to support Ukraine, and then they'll end up supporting him. So that's kind of how it works. It's one of those two things. One of them is kind of a little bit more long-term and down the road, especially depending on when your next election cycles for your representatives or senators may be. The other one's a lot more quick, just writing letters to them, but it doesn't guarantee absolute progress. But with that, I hope that does address that well, Gary, and thank you so much once again for the support. And I hope that does address the best ways I can think of to get that support. Well, at least to try and get your representatives or your elected officials to try and support something like that. But nevertheless, I can't really get into that too much more because domestic politics is something I completely avoid, but those are really the ways that you can try and work the governmental system in general, regardless of political affiliation, to try and achieve what you're looking for. And so with that, I hope that does address that well. Thank you once again, Gary, for being a legend. And with that, we are on to the next one.
In our next super chat is going to go to another longtime channel legend, Super Bonker 9000, who's been here forever as well. And he puts in a 20. And thank you very much, Super Bonker. And it's good to see you once again. He says, I hope the coffee and pizza funds are still valid for the enforcers. And yes, they are. And he says, great to see my old friends here. And LSA forever.
And LSA forever, baby! And welcome back, Super Bunker! I can't believe you're here tonight. We were actually talking about you right before the stream. It was crazy. Matthew could tell you, literally a minute before your Super Chat came in, we were in the countdown. I was like, yeah, you know, like, Super Bunker, he's really cool. I wonder where he is. And then he threw his Super Chat.
Sure
I'm like, no way! That was crazy. It was like Beetlejuice. But beyond that, coffee and pizza funds are still valid fungible tokens, Super Bunker 9000. We still accept Coffee and Pizza Fund, because Coffee and Pizza Fund helps us so much to be hype and energetic for this stream to make it possible and keep it running. And so I got to thank you so much once again for the support, and I gotta thank you once again for helping this channel to be possible and enjoying this channel so much, because it's amazing that you love to see all of your old friends here in the chat, and it's amazing to see you as well, because I consider you to be one of our old friends as well, because you've been around since the channel existed. And so thank you so much once again for being here tonight. I hope I was able to address that well, and it's just amazing to see legends popping up time and time again, night after night, recently. It's been incredible, but thank you once again. I hope that addressed that the best I can. And with that, we are now moving on to the last question before we move back into the news. But do not be afraid. We will answer all super chats that are thrown in throughout the course of the stream. It's not just going to be these three. We always answer all of them. And also, we answer live chats as well. You do not have to throw in a super chat to have a question answered. The reason why I'm going over that tonight is because we have so many new viewers here with us. You do not have to pay a single cent or even pay a single moment of time to this channel to help it to keep running. You can just watch and enjoy it if you want. The super chat chats are always prioritized, though, because it's the only way that we're able to keep the channel running. So anyone who throws in the super chat, we always address their super chats, even if there is no comment, and thank them for it. But if you just want to ask a question and you don't want to throw in a super chat, you can. You just have to add it at Enforcer Matt at the beginning of your question, then ask your question, and Matthew will put that into the spreadsheet, and hopefully we'll be able to get to your question by the end of the stream. Just to explain how our channel works, just in case you're new and you've never seen this channel before, that's how we run it. But with that, I hope that does address that well. We are now on to the final question of this segment before we move back into the news.
All right, and this one is going to go to Herberg, who throws in a $20 donation, and thank you, Herberg, as well, very much for that support.
Hey!
And they said, just a thought, guys, considering how delusional Putler and apparently most of Russia seem, how likely is World War III, and how can he justify sending their kids to die in a war against the West, and what can be that important?
That's a good question, Herberg. That's a really good one. I'm trying to figure out an answer to it. Because it takes a very deep understanding of the Russian national mindset, or more so the Russian national kind of spirit, to really explain why they do what they do. And I'm going to try and figure out how to explain that without doing what Putin did and talk about like 30 minutes of history to explain why they are the way they are. So let's see. Let me reread that. World War III is slightly likely, but I don't think it's entirely likely, because while the Russians are really proud of themselves and feel like they are just the chosen people of the world, the reality is that the Russian government realizes that Russia is a shell of what it ever used to be, even at its worst. The Russian government the Russian nation practically has no economy, it has no meaningful military, so they really know that they can't fight anyone. That's why we saw recently that Putin made a huge mention about all of the new kinds of nuclear weapons that they created that will be trying to work around Western nuclear defense systems or anything similar, because all of Russia knows that the only reason that the Russian government and the Russian Federation exists in the form it does today is because of their nuclear arsenal, protecting them from any kind of a foreign intervention inside of Russia. And so they know that a war with the West would probably be a suicide mission for the Russians and would end up in a nuclear holocaust, because they would have to try and attempt that to stop their country from being obliterated and run over by the West. So going off of that, the best way that he could probably justify the Russians going to war with the West, knowing that and keeping that in mind, the conventional war-wise thing, is to try and do the propaganda spiel they're going with now. The West is nothing but demonized devils, and we have to kill them, or we have to try and pretty much conduct a civilizing mission like countries would have done in the late 1800s to bring them back from their wayward ways. Their wicked wayward ways is the best way that I can explain the propaganda spin right now. And that seems like something that's more on a moralistic mindset, but when you really think about it, that is very similar to what the Nazis said about the Jews leading up to World War II, which led to them being put inside of concentration camps. It is more so trying to make Western people look subhuman than anything compared to the Russians. So that way you can justify the war, because the Russians in their minds and the Russian public is going to be looking at it as trying to fight subhumans in the West and put them down. That's really how they're trying to gear the Russian public to look at this whole thing, which is pretty insane. But beyond that, I think that's really the only way they can try and justify it, because that's really the only way you can really get a populace into the mindset of fighting a war when there's really no good reason, is to just straight up try and make it sound like the other side is subhuman or not even human, so that way it makes it sound like you're really fighting against savage animals more so than fellow people that just happen to live in a different country with a different mindset. So I hope that explains that fairly well. I mean, that's maybe the most important thing I think you could come up with in the modern Russian national mindset that would explain how they could justify a war. But beyond that, it would be really hard to do that. I really am even running short of ideas trying to explain this right now of how you really could justify it, rather than just the West is wicked, which is really the only propaganda spiel they have going for them right now. But with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And also, really quickly, I'm seeing somebody have it in the chat, and I'm having to make sure that I'm checking this, because I have a feeling that I'm going to have to quickly say this for just a brief moment. We do not support partisan political opinions or views here on this channel. This channel takes a strictly politically neutral approach. I do not endorse any political side, whether it be right-leaning or left-leaning. I do not address either of them. And we also do not allow comments like that in our live chat where people try and promote certain political views or affiliations and also try and demonize other groups because they believe that they're not American enough or pro-Ukrainian enough or whatever enough. We do not support that here. So I would heavily encourage that you do not get involved in those kinds of comments in the live chat, because our general policy on that is to outright ban people immediately for making statements like that. Sometimes, though, we do give leeway and we end up just removing the comments or muting whoever said that. And I think we're giving that kind of leeway right now tonight. But keep in mind, if that does continue, we will eventually, unfortunately, have to end up banning people for their political statements and comments. Because this channel is pro-Ukrainian and that's it. I don't get into the whole domestic politics side of things. That is a cesspit, and I don't want to be in that cesspit unless if I have to be, and that time and place is not right now. So with that, I hope that does address that well. And if y'all do enjoy some unbiased, non-political news reporting, the only bias I'll tell you I have is a pro-Ukrainian bias. But beyond that, I don't get into any of the other biases at all. So if you enjoy that, consider hitting the like button and helping a channel like this to continue to survive and shine in the pro-Ukrainian world. But moving on from that, I hope I was able to address your question well, and thank you so much once again for the support, Herberg, and helping this channel to keep on running, because folks like you have been around forever and helped to continue to make this channel possible. But moving on from that little bit of news and back into our location unknowns, it's time for us to move on to this interesting Ukrainian FPV drone.
What about the Russian losses, though? What happened to that?
Oh, we're getting there. We're working our way there. Like, there's still a couple left. But this drone is really cool, Matthew, because this is an experimental drone right here being tested just today. And it's so cool because this is a high-speed drone design, one of the first in the world. This thing can get up to a top speed of nearly 90 miles an hour after takeoff. Meaning that this meaning that this thing has about, I believe, a fourth of the speed of an anti-tank guided missile, which is very fast. But check this out.
A little bit of suspense.
And there it goes. It's lifting off. And
that's weird.
It's starting to tilt sideways. You'll see once it tilts completely sideways. There it goes.
Wow, that is fast. Jeez, man, the thing took off.
Yeah,
so it's almost like it's not a tilt rotor because the rotors aren't tilting, but the whole thing basically balances sideways and turns into like a bit of like an airplane design.
Yeah, and look how maneuverable it is. It's pulling some pretty hard hairpin turns, pretty much.
It's called the rocket.
It flies like one. It is actually a really cool little drone. And Danny V says it's not the fastest drone in the world. That's true, but it is the fastest one that can deliver a warhead that can destroy an armored vehicle. So it's got to get something going for it. I mean, it's the fastest in one kind of a category, not the fastest in the world, but still really impressive to see a drone able to travel at 90 miles an hour that can deliver a debilitating warhead onto a Russian armored vehicle. But moving on from that and into our next clip, we also got to see another one of those modernized Dana SPGs that the Ukrainians have been operating along the front lines. This one has that modernized cab that we saw on the Zilly or something like that. I forgot the actual name of it, but it's the one with a 155mm gun in turret instead of the 152mm. But we can see this one moving around and operating in Ukraine, and it's always nice to see these things. A huge shout out to the Czechs that provided all of these SPGs to Ukraine because they've been doing incredible work. Moving on from that and into our last bit of location unknown news, we also got to see the Russian casualty report over the past 24 hours, and it was really impressive.
They lost it today, I'm telling you what. They got a plane, plus they got 6 Bobcats. It's a good old day, I'm telling you.
Let's get it, baby! 6 Bobcats get series destroyed, along with 960 Russian soldiers knocked out of the war, and 29 armored personnel carriers, 61 supply trucks, 14 tanks, 47 artillery pieces, 35 drones, 3 MLRSs, a single Su-34, the other one's going to be included in tomorrow's casualty report, 3 cruise missiles, 5 anti-aircraft systems, and the 6 Bobcat skid steers. Overall, an incredibly good day for the Ukrainian defenders, once again showing that they are really starting to rack up the losses on the Russians and keep them at bay as best as they possibly can. Moving on from the location unknowns and into the front lines where all of these Russian losses were had today, we got to see near Tombolzhanka a Russian tank reverse onto a landmine. This is that kind of stupid that wins you Darwin Awards, but check it out. It drove over the mine, it stopped, and then it reversed onto the mine. Right there. And it's out. All the boys on the Discord call piped up immediately to go, oh dang, that's a hit! And we can see the driver, the gunner, and the commander all bailing out and running for it. But that's the end of that clip, and really nice to see that they were able to knock them out, and of course, make sure to take care of things, because we always love to see
they're gonna knock them around a little bit, you know, spread those weights out and pump iron for 10 days straight.
Oh yeah, man, they doing it, man, they doing it. But moving on from the northeastern area and down into Bakhmut, we also got to see that a BMP in this area was knocked out by the 93rd at very close range with some kind of a rocket. We didn't really get to see if it was an RPG or a small or an AT-4 or anything like that. We didn't get to see any of that, but we did get to see the hit going into the rear of the BMP and exploding. Huge shout out to the 93rd Brigade that made this possible today. Boom, right there into the fuel tank, and it explodes.
This is Moto Life UA. There must be some motorcycle enthusiasts out here. I'm telling you. Looks like they're riding a Harley, though, so I don't know if that's going to cut it.
Dude. Come and join our moto. Dude.
And also, by the way, like, seriously speaking, I have nothing against Harley riders. I'm not into all that junk. All the motorcycles are motorcycles to me. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. But anyways, moving on from that clip, huge shout out to the 93rd. It's time for us to move on down into Avdiivka, where we got to see the Russians getting hit for the first time today by a French bomb. A precision-guided AASM-250. Which is a precision-guided 250-kilogram bomb. Kind of like an intermediate-sized bomb, as far as they go. Well, you see the Russians here, doing their thing. But you know what we're about to not see them doing? Their thing. They're about to stop doing it pretty quickly. Oh, and there was the hit.
That was a big hit.
A big one.
You notice they got the chest piece over here on the left, so you can either record or you can checkmate them.
That's a check. Dude, you sit there and move the entire country of the Czech Republic north towards the Russians. You go check. And they're like, damn it. They're like, we have to move our king now. Which the king on the chessboard is as useless as Putin, by the way. Just throwing that out there. Ooh. And with that, that's the end of the clip, and it appears that that bomb was able to get a pretty good hit on the Avdiivka coke plant. Meanwhile, there was a video I showed y'all yesterday where we kind of had a little bit of a mystery as to what happened here. We didn't have an after-action report kind of showing us the damage caused to this Bradley, but I'm going to show y'all this clip again and show y'all the hit that happened. So this hit was right under the turret on the left side, right about there, by this Lancet, and it appears that the Bradley did not care. We didn't see any of the crew bail out either, and it appeared that things were just fine. That's where we left off that video yesterday. We were able to get an update on that very Bradley today, showing that it did make it off the line, it was still usable, and the only thing that was damaged was the brought armor packages that were attached to the side of the Bradley, and they did their job. So it appears that the Bradley is still entirely operational. It's the same one we saw in the other clip, and hey, the Bradleys are indestructible. Really showing off the armored abilities of these Bradleys when they do get hit by stuff like this. Nice to see. Love to see it. But moving on from that little bit of news and out of Avdiivka, considering that the front line didn't move a single inch today, and the Ukrainians held their ground throughout pretty much the entirety of the front line, it's time for us to move on down to Mykhailivka, where we also got to see another Russian vehicle get destroyed down here. Here they come rolling along through the fields, and there goes one BMP.
The other one's just creeping along like nothing really happened. Like just keep going at your slow pace. You'll be fine. Just creep right along.
And we see the Russians bailing out as the BMP is now exploding. We see them dropping a bomblet into this BMP-2 here. Ooh! Oh man, that was actually pretty devastating right there.
Something flew over there to the right. Oh look, they're dropping a Coke can on them.
Ooh! That one got the engine. And now you see this entire column here taking a nice little schmolda. And now you see them giving a little schmolda to the Russians. Ooh, schmolda bolda. And we can see them dropping a bomblet into the turret of this other BMP-2 here and setting it alight. We now see them looking at this Russian MBT and then showing us the damage that was caused to this entire column and its failed assault today. Once again showing that the Russians are making no progress towards Nova Mykhailivka. But moving on down into Volodymyrivka, we also got to see the 72nd Brigade hitting some Russian launches. When you see the Russians trying to work their launcher. And also, the caption to this video actually gave a little bit of description of how this launcher works. It was a specifically designed launcher for the Soviets to provide to the North Vietnamese Army, the NVA, or the other armed group of North Vietnam, the Viet Cong, in trying to provide some kind of rocket support or some light artillery support to their forces operating in southern Vietnam. That's what this tube is right here. They've whipped these things back out of the storage lots to bring them into service in Ukraine, although they were never even intended to be used by the Soviet army during a conventional war. But we see him using it right here, and it's about to get hit and unusable. Doot, 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 doot. Come and join our conga. Doot, 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 doot. Where you going, bro? Doot, doot. And there goes the drone right onto the tube. Have you ever wanted to see a Russian boom tube get blown up by a drone? Well, you, my friend, are absolutely in luck. Introducing the all-new Tube Deleter 9000. Not only does it burn the tubes, but it ties the tubes, making them completely unusable in the future. Check it out as they look at this destroyed little sad tube right there. Very pitiful, but nevertheless, showing you the amazing work of Ukrainian firepower throughout the entirety of the front lines. Moving on from that clip, and a little bit further down the lines and into the area of Fedorivka, we also got to hear of the Su-34s getting shot down, which we talked about a little bit earlier. So now we're going to be moving on to Robotyne, where we got to see the Russians getting hit with some cluster rounds.
Here we can see the Russian forces trying to burrow into the tree lines. The Ukrainians started to use cluster bombs to draw them out and turn them into nice, dissectable meals, minced thoroughly. We could see the cluster bombs literally traveling down the entirety of the tree line, making sure to salt and pepper the Russians for the upcoming meal.
Give them some Old Bay.
Put some Old Bay on that bitch, because it'd be crabby.
Whoa!
Oh, man.
Whoa, Nelly. No need for such brutal comments, Nelly. Please cool it.
And I have
Look,
to say,
we see the Russian ants crawling amongst the field, trying to crawl out of their holes. And here we see the corn group, freak on a leash.
what the hell?
That's just no one.
Here we can see one of the cluster bomb eggs laying on the ground. Not yet hatched, but when these do, they are an explosive hatching of life and death simultaneously. We can see them picking up a small remnant of a drone.
That's a big remnant. That's heavy.
How many rushes does it take to lift a 20-pound airframe? 4 of them, actually.
Probably a good bit.
Это управляемый модуль планирования и коррекции. То, что делает авиабомбу управляемой российскую. А то, что мы там сейчас снимали, это, собственно, кассетный боеприпас был, которую эти крылья несли. Забрали, снимем классное видео. И, наконец-то, не на пальцах, а на предмете объясним, что такое КАП. Что такое управляемая авиабомба. Но вот это, кстати, был редкий вариант авиабомбы, кассетный. То есть он выбрасывал кучу суббоеприпаса. Пошли.
Man, he's doing a waddle. He's not even running.
Yeah. Man, he went from calm to doing like some kind of weird run waddling down the street. Man,
look
go
at
back
him.
and replay that transition. That was like a comedy edit or something. That was too much.
Dude, Russian Blair Witch Project right here. Or
That was like one of those
Hansel.
edits when somebody's like sitting in their house, and, like everything's fine, then like 2 seconds later the house is on fire, they're running in circles.
No, dude, that was one of those edits where like it's the amateur horror movie where they're like, oh, okay, I think we outran. Okay, we're good. And then you hear that, and then it just cuts to the camera like violently shaking towards the ground as they're pretending to run. It's literally that. We now see they found a large cylinder. This reminds him of his mother.
Круглых суббоеприпасов,
Oh,
которые разбрасывают его на большой площади, и они взрываются.
It's so wide and so open, you could throw a hot dog down that thing and it wouldn't touch the sides. Really impressive stuff.
Легкой бронированной техники и пехоты вне укрытий. А теперь давай-ка съебывать, а то активненько накрывают.
You now see them doing their Blair Witch remake here again.
Автомобиль с 2014 года в коллективе. За его ремонт отдали 3 раза больше, чем он стоит. Но все равно мы на нем ездим, и еще, повторяю, будем ездить. Прям вот, это часть нашей семьи. Это была утренняя зарядка. Мы его сняли. Итак, собственно, продолжаем.
Correction. That BMP right there, we've been calling these guys Russians the entire clip. That BMP has a cross on it, so these are actually Ukrainian sappers here, not Russian ones. I'm still going to laugh at that run.
That run was still laughable though.
Итак, собственно, продолжение видео.
I don't know how I didn't realize that, considering there's been a giant Corn Group watermark floating around the screen the whole time, and Corn Group is Ukrainian. I don't know why my brain did not process that these were Ukrainians. It's maybe because it almost sounds like they're speaking Russian. But anyways.
Что такое УМПК? Это управляемый модуль планирования коррекции. Вот с помощью вот этой хуйни они обычно авиабомбу, орки, россияне, превращают в корректируемый боеприпас, который летит там в зависимости от высоты, набранной самолетом, там 50 или больше километров, и более-менее точно куда-то прилетает. Более-менее это чаще все-таки они не попадают, могу показать кучу роликов, когда они вот, непонятно куда вообще бьют просто в поля. Вот этот был надет на боеприпас более сложный, тот, который кассетный, разбрасывает там огромное количество таких с теннисный шар суббоеприпасов для поражения людей вне укрытия и там легкой бронированной техники.
And a lot of people were pointing this out in the chat. A lot of people were pointing out, well, it sounds like they're speaking Russian. And I swear it sounds to me like they are. Because, you know, we've been listening to Ukrainians and Russians throughout the war long enough that I feel like I have a pretty good ability to discern Ukrainian from Russian. And it sounds a lot like this guy is speaking Russian. And that's what threw me off originally, to think that these guys were Russians.
А рассыпать-то рассыпают, но взрываются они далеко не все или не взрываются вовсе. Вот, поэтому вот мы эту штуку подобрали, чтобы вот наглядно объяснить уже не на пальцах, как выглядит кап. Эта же штука цепляется на кап и точно так же превращает ее в управление. То есть потом разберем, покажем. Там внутри простейший модуль GPS, скорее всего, глонасовский. Вот. Провода, источник питания, сзади еще такой хвост, он просто отломался. На этом хвосте простейшая авионика, которая позволяет его как-то корректировать, управлять. То есть это просто планер по факту, который планирует двигатели. Здесь нет, здесь есть несколько элеронов, которые управляют ее полетом. Ну вот, собственно, выглядит это так просто, блядь, как 2 копейки. Никакого хай-тека этого нет. То есть сваркой собрана, блядь, эта хрень еще 22.02.24, соответственно, 7 дней назад. Это кто-то проверял, годен он или нет, он и поставил здесь автограф, что он годен. На каком-то аэродроме Рашки. Ну, собственно, все. То есть вы видите сами. То есть это простое. Я думаю, что наш Укроборонпром мог бы произвести то же самое и точно так же отправлять русским подарочки с самолета. Ну, просто нужно немножко, можем кому-то подарить, если кто-то хочет это направление развивать. Вот. Вот этими штуками вокруг авиабомбы, вот оно вот так застегивается. Ну, собственно, все.
And that's the end of the clip, but still giving us a little bit of a look at this thing, and also the sappers doing their job. But moving on from that, now the Robotyne area, it's time for us to move on down towards Krynky, because today we got to saw some Russians running into a ambush. And I mean a hambush. They got hammed on. Pretty seriously. Check it out. The music was hamming up too, but we can see here our Russians roaming around. And we see our Ukrainians here laying the trap and once again confirming, because it's just so shocking, y'all, how people out there just lie outright with no backup or proof or video or picture evidence. There was a guy out there, very famously known for selling hot dogs around here, that said that the Ukrainians had lost Krynky and the Russians were winning on all fronts. Isn't that so weird that that liar said that, and then we get a video today showing Ukrainians still in Krynky, inside of the town, although it's completely destroyed, they're still inside of it, and ambushing Russian forces that are trying to move into it? Isn't that a little odd? I find that really odd to me, because it sounds like someone's flat out lying again for views and clicks. But you know, that's the kind of stuff that happens, and you know, when you do that, usually it comes back to bite you, especially when it's so easy to disprove flat out lies for clicks and views. But we can see here the Russians completely unaware of the Ukrainian threat that's nearby, and they're about to learn the hard way when a grenade gets flung their direction and it ends up exploding right on the first one, shocking the whole group. And now we can see the rest of them don't know what's happened. They don't even know where the grenade really came from. And they're trying to figure everything out.
It's the Russian guys coming out the hole. They don't even know what's happening, man. But the arrows tell us a whole different story. It tells us these Russians are about to have some trouble.
And we can see one Russian here appears to have, actually two of them appear to have survived at the moment. The Ukrainian lobs another nade, though, and one of them might not be making it out of here. Actually, it looks like both of them are making out of here in the meantime, but we already know the ending of this film. Only one can make it out. It's the horror movie rule, and for these Russians, it may as well be a horror story. And there goes the other, and that leaves a lone survivor, roll credits, to run off into the woods to tell the Russians that the Ukrainians are still there, and that the Russian commanders and also a certain YouTube channel has lied to them about who controls the city. But moving on from that and into our next clip, we also got to see two additional Russians getting taken out near this area. And you see our drone lining up for its run on the trench. See a Russian here trying to stop the drone, and I think he'll fail. Uh-oh, he's failed. It's a little too late now. It's over for him. The war is over for you. Oh, the war is over for Partisan.
Oh, dear. Oh my, he met a most unfortunate end.
You sank my battleship. But still, that's largely the end of this clip. We're actually going to be ending that clip right there.
Dear me.
But moving on from that, and speaking of Russians, you know, getting the worst of it because the Ukrainians still control Krynky, which is just such a shocker, especially when you actually do your job, you know. But we got to hear of a Russian doctor speaking of high losses here on the western bank, or the left bank of the Kherson region, or the Dnipro River. But here's the clip, and I'm going to be reading the translation. I'm tired. Aren't we all? Join the club. Every day, 300s. Young guys die. Young guys get such injuries. And they scream, it hurts me. They are unexpected, they just get such injuries that they should not get. First I need to cut them. Through pain, through tones, through screams. And then give them a baseball. Very American of them. Either I participate myself, or the guys take me to the car, which again drives under wild risks, under wild mortar shelling. They leave from here from the market. The guys who drive away risk very much. Hold. Everything flies over us. Wings, big drones, winged. They will not be noticed. Drones, kamikazes, drones with drops, adjusters, landmines. A lot of advanced foreign weapons. Well, the same ones. The same mortars, guns, and so on. They shoot in different ways. They shoot with explosives. And for the most part to cripple, so that more people were wounded. Nobody regrets them. I don't know what's wrong with them. Why do they hate people so much? I mean, that's a great question, Russian doctor man. Like, why in the world are y'all in Ukraine? It's not the Ukrainians that hate y'all. It's more so y'all that hate them because you're kind of like inside of their country. You know, I'm not really trying to make that astute of an observation, but it's kind of weird how this guy is trying to make the Russians sound like the victim. It's kind of like the usual thing that a lot of really sick in the head people do, where they'll attack you, and then when you respond back, then they act like they're the victim. There are many such sick people like that out there in the world. And just like the Russians, they do everything in their own self-serving, narcissistic interests. But moving on from that. And in their direction, not much is flying. For the most part, we just don't let them to the shore, and the shells do not lie on the target. As if this is some kind of conspiracy theory, as if they, not a conspiracy, it's as if everything's thought out and the team does not shoot at these positions. And what a shame. But here, there were FSB and aviation and tankers and artillery. There was no one. But nevertheless, everyone misses. And that's the end of that guy's clip, but just giving you all a little bit of the woes and miseries of a Russian soldier that invaded a foreign country and wonders why the locals hate him. And back to the weather at 11. But moving on from that little bit of news down in Kherson, it seems as though things are once again going quite well down there for the Ukrainians, and they're at least inflicting a decent amount of casualties and continuing to hold Krynky, and from what we heard yesterday, expanding westwards towards the town of Kazachyi-Lahri. Moving on from that, it's time for us to get to the speech from President Volodymyr Zelenskyy here on day 738 of the news of the war in Ukraine. And so, without further ado...
speech, we've got the green chair today, it's a good day.
Hello everyone, we have the freaking English track. It's time to get on that Ukrainian track, baby.
But here's the speech.
Дорогі українці, українки, весь день в Одесі тривала рятувальна операція на місці влучання російського шахеду. Зараз ДСНС, поліція, інші служби продовжують працювати. Є інформація про людей під завалами. Це був звичайний житловий будинок, один з багатьох, які зруйнували російські нелюди. Станом на час, на саме цей час, відомо про 7 загиблих, і серед них 2 дитини. Немовля, 4 місяці, його звали Тимофій, та хлопчик Марк, ще 3 років дитині не виповнилось. Мої співчуття усім рідним, близьким. 8 людей постраждали. Ще дитина, 3 роки, дівчинка. Усім, хто був поранений, надається необхідна допомога. Я дякую кожному і кожній, хто бере участь в рятувальній операції, хто підтримує людей. І дуже важливо бути усім разом, допомагати. У таких атаках саме шахедами жодного військового сенсу немає і бути не може. І це терор, який має на меті виключно знищення життів, виключно залякування людей. Світ знає, що можна протиставити терору. Світ має достатньо систем ППО, систем захисту від шахедів і ракет. І затягування з постачанням зброї для України, ППО для захисту наших людей призводить, на жаль, до таких втрат. До того, що перелік дітей, чиї життя забирає Росія, постійно зростає. Україна не просила нічого більше, ніж треба, щоб захистити життя. А коли життя втрачаються, а у партнерів просто внутрішні політичні ігри чи суперечки, які обмежують наш захист, це неможливо зрозуміти. З цим неможливо погодитись. І буде неможливо забути. Світ пам'ятатиме це. Російський терор повинен програти. Це принципово. Немає нічого, що вони в Москві визнають, окрім сили. Отже, має бути більше нашої сили і єдності світу, єдності тут, у нас, в Україні. Якщо комусь ще не вистачає мотивації, шахеди щоночі – це мотивація. Російські ракети, російське зло, кожна наша втрата, кожен наш воїн, який віддав своє життя заради незалежності України, чітке розуміння ворога і реальна, неудавана повага до наших героїв – це мотивація битись, знищувати окупанта, працювати заради нашої держави і людей, заради зміцнення України. Кожен, хто працює на державу, повинен бути в державі, за державу, дбати про державу, про спільні інтереси, а не про якісь там особисті інтереси після війни. Зараз всі мають підтримувати оборону, дбати про людей, про збереження життя. Кожен щодня має щось додавати Україні, нашій спільній силі. Щодня я в комунікації з нашими партнерами, щоб ми могли отримати саме те, що необхідно. Щодня доповіді військових, щодня главком, командувачі на фронті, саме там, де потрібно. У главкома карт-бланш на кадрові зміни в армії, в штабах, будь-які. Всі українські командири мають знати фронт, відчувати фронт, реальні потреби. Мають реально бути солдатами, сержантами, бути такими, якими потрібно, щоб досягти українських цілей. На початку тижня, після повернення генерал-полковника Сирського з фронту, я очікую його із детальною доповіддю та конкретними пропозиціями щодо подальших змін і наших дій. Готуємо подальшу роботу з партнерами, наші зустрічі, наші перемовини заради зброї для України, заради безперервності підтримки. Сила потрібна, і від усіх треба виграти цю битву проти зла і також проти зневіри, на яку Путін дуже розраховує. Треба захистити Україну і життя, і ми можемо це зробити. Я дякую кожному і кожній, хто зараз в бою, на бойових постах, бойових завданнях. Я дякую усім воїнам мобільних вогневих груп, усім, хто захищає наше небо. Дякую усім, хто працює в оборонці та щодня збільшує наше власне виробництво зброї. Це надзвичайно важливо. І зараз я хочу також відзначити колектив ДСНС України, усіх рятувальників, а особливо, які працюють зараз в Одесі. Денис Пантелеєв, Віталій Чурилін, Олександр Кавзалович, Олександр Дога, Дмитро Головченко, Олексій Гармаш, Федір Кайсин, Олександр Попов, Михайло Текза, Андрій Бахметєв, Геннадій Карагеоргій. Дякую вам, хлопці. Дякую всім вам. Дякую вашим колегам. Слава кожному і кожній, хто в Україні, за Україну та з Україною. Слава Україні!
And Heroes Slava. And with that, that is the end of the speech from President Volodymyr Zelenskyy here on day 738 of the war in Ukraine. And it's time for us to move on into the second segment of the stream, the fun part, where we get to talk to all of y'all. We get to talk to all the folks who threw in a super chat. We get to talk to all the folks, hopefully, who threw in a live chat. We get to talk to everyone in between. But before we even do that, I got to thank y'all for watching so far tonight, and I also have to give y'all a really big announcement. Right now, this stream, oh, not this stream, but this channel is sitting at 163,900 subscribers, meaning that we have gained about 640 subscribers over the course of today, and we are getting really close to getting to 164,000. If you are new to this channel and watching right now, if you hit that subscribe button, if enough of y'all do, one of y'all is going to end up being the 164,000th subscriber to this channel. So I'm not trying to incentivize it or anything, but that could be a pretty big bragging right going forward that you were a subscriber on a good even number, 164,000. So make sure to keep that in mind and, just think it over. I'm not telling y'all to subscribe, but I'm suggesting that y'all subscribe. There's a difference. There's a difference. But with that, I hope that does let y'all know what kind of opportunity lies in store for all of you. And it's time for us to move on into the questions. But Matthew, what do we got?
All right, so we've got some good ones, and we have a 20 from David Conrad, who says, "I love rabbit holes."
Hey! And I gotta thank you so much, David Conrad, for the support. I love rabbit holes, and I think they're great. The greatest, the best, the best, Jerry, the best. I love rabbit holes. Y'all know I do because I go into them endlessly. But you know something really interesting? A cool little rabbit hole for me to share. Just a little tidbit. Just a tiny smidgen. The oldest building in the United States is in Albuquerque, New Mexico, if I remember correctly. And let me see if I can find it. This is somewhere around here, I believe. Let's see here. It's like from 1619. It's older than the United States itself. Really older than most of the English colonies that really would create the 13 colonies of the United States. But it is somewhere here. I forgot what it's called, and I forgot what it kind of looks like, but it was made in 1619, and it still is here to this day, the oldest building in America. Just as a cool little rabbit hole, just to share one, just to make sure that everyone remembers that rabbit holes are actually a thing, and they're here to stay. But nevertheless, thank you so much once again for the support. I hope I was able to address that fairly well, and I thank you so much for enjoying the rabbit holes, and I thank you for supporting this channel and appreciating enough to find it worthwhile to keep running. I mean, folks like you make this thing possible. And it's just incredible to know that you enjoy it enough that you would want to help this channel to keep running so that way I can keep doing rabbit holes and keep telling you all the news. And some people said, how in the world did you even get into that rabbit hole? I just threw it out there because when he said, I like rabbit holes, I was like, you know what? I got to give him a rabbit hole. So with that, I hope that does address that fairly well indeed. But still, thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that the best I can. And thank you once again for being a legend of this channel and, of course, being here with us even to this day. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next super chat is going to go to Panama Floyd, who puts in a $20 donation. And thank you very much, Panama, for that support. He says, in reference to Moldova, someone should tell Putin that Hitler trying to fight on two fronts is probably why that dude lost the war. And take one from the chat.
And I agree with you completely. That is actually a really good point. And Panama Floyd, you are the Floyd of Panama. You are the one who runs the canals. You are the one who controls the seas. And most importantly, you're the one with two chairs. But nevertheless.
Go in the barbershop. You gotta hate those carp.
Oh, those carp, those dreaded carp. Wait a minute. There's a town called Escobar?
I thought you said Escobar. I was about to say, he probably has a town somewhere in there.
That is one letter away from being a town that would be on the CIA's watch list for many reasons. But beyond that, I do have to say...
That's Escobar's cabal, the Escobar.
Dude, that's where Escobar has all of his parties. He has them at the Escobar. You know what I mean? It's like, but man... But if you have enough of the Escobar, you can go down and get a little drink of something at the Quipo. Or a Sweepo, as it
or you can go over and get you some La Mesa at Santa Rosa in Las Minas.
Man,
or La Jota.
Man, better yet, man, Las Mesa is what they call it after a cartel execution happens down the street. It's a La Mesa. You know what I mean? Like, it's a pretty bad sight.
Or it could be like our subscriber count these days, and it could turn Gigante, even over there on the, looks like the east coast over there. Look over there on that east coast. See that Gigante? Oh, yeah. Let's see that. It's a name.
Oh, here it is. Yeah, right here.
Here you see right there. There you go.
Man, honestly, I like myself some free
The Enforcing Channel is going to move to Gigante.
Man, honestly though, I'm not gonna lie. Panama ain't that bad of a place. No lie. It's actually a fairly decent Central American country. And I gotta say, really cool place. Like, we can drop down here into this city. And I show you what Panama is about. Let me show you. See, not that bad. Actually, it was pretty nice.
That is actually not that bad looking. All All the stores are unfamiliar though. Like I don't recognize a single place. Like this doesn't seem very like Americanized.
Oh, no, not at all. But you know what's cool about Panama is that literally the entire nation's economy literally just revolves around the canal. Like the entire, no joke. I think it's like 50% of their governmental revenue annually comes from the Panama Canal. It is a huge moneymaker for them. And that's really why
What do they do? Just take some money off the boats as they're passing by? Like, can we have a little bit of that toll?
They make ships pay a fee to transit the canal.
Oh, well, there's where they get their money. That must be a hell of a moneymaker to support the whole place.
Oh, it is. It is a huge moneymaker. And the Suez Canal operates similarly. You have to pay a transit fee to go through the Suez. But the Panama Canal was the real OG, kind of like the first. Well, actually, I'm not. Yeah, I think it was actually the first. Or the Panama Canal and the Suez Canal kind of came around the actual same time, just a few years apart from each other. But this is a really cool thing. And also, one thing that a lot of people don't know is that the U.S. military, well, not the U.S. military, but the United States actually owned and operated the entire canal up until about the 1980s when we finally handed it over to the nation of Panama. And that's kind of when they started to turn into a much better country to live in, is once they had a little bit of that sweet, sweet moolah that comes in from that giant canal. But beyond that, I'm actually about to start rabbit holing here. Another cool country is the Dominican Republic. Because while it borders Haiti, which is a literal unmitigated hell, the Dominican Republic is actually one of the fastest growing economies in the Caribbean. And actually is on par with its standard of living to Mexico, and it's even eking out to be a little bit better than Mexico these days. And as far as Central America goes, Mexico is actually pretty well off compared to everyone else. So the Dominican Republic getting up to that level is actually pretty wild. Another cool thing is that you can actually see the divide in between the Dominican Republic and Haiti on their border. Like, for example, here, you can see that Haiti cut down their forests and never replanted them. And then where the river, well, where the creek pretty much is, that divides Haiti from the Dominican Republic, once you cross over, the Dominican Republic actually has some nice vegetation. It looks livable, unlike Haiti, which I cannot tell y'all enough is literally hell, and you can go and pull up a million documentaries to find out why Haiti is a literal hell. But beyond that, the Dominican Republic is actually really cool, and a lot of people have been looking at the Dominican Republic to start branching out into a tourism industry, which is not really ever going to die from what can be told over at least the next century. And the Dominican Republic, if they continue to work on their tourism department, or more so their tourism industry, and also branch out and diversify into a couple of other industries, they'll actually be well set to possibly even get up to the point of a standard of living close to maybe in the United States or Canada's, and within the next 30 years is what they're approximating right now. So that is actually really cool when you think about it. Kind of like a small little rabbit hole, because everyone else in the Caribbean does really badly for the most part. As far as their economy, Cuba for obvious reasons, as well as, well, Jamaica's doing okay, but they're not doing, the best out there. They're kind of middling. But Haiti is literally the worst. Like, you just can't get worse than Haiti, no matter what. And I see a lot of people in the chat, they're like, yeah, they are pretty bad off in Haiti. And there's no lie about it. I mean, like, the central government in Haiti doesn't even really exist. The whole entire country is just run by this weird hodgepodge, massive mixture of different gangs vying for control of certain parts of each city, especially Port-au-Prince, and even nowadays, Cape Haitian, which was supposed to be like a safe haven and a massive tourist destination, even when Haiti was in massive decline. But nowadays, even Cape Haitian is untouchable by most tourists and modern standards. So, yeah, pretty bad overall. Like, just to summarize everything, pretty damn bad overall. And also another thing, I'm trying to figure out how much do I need to rabbit hole and how much I don't need to. But another cool rabbit hole about, well, not cool, but it's an interesting rabbit hole about Haiti, is that Haiti has actually had the U.S. government intervene multiple times in Haiti due to the massive problems that were arising throughout its history. The United States actually occupied Haiti before World War II, I believe, for like 4 years. And over that course of time, because it was kind of like an armed uprising that was happening in Haiti, and it was an absolute terrible situation. And at that time in history, America, of course, even then, was expected to step in and deal with the problem. So we ended up sending the U.S. military down there, and at the end of it, 40,000 Haitians were dead, and I think about 10,000 U.S. soldiers were dead as well. So it was a pretty freaky ordeal, and something that nobody ever talks about ever in the history of anything. But it's a very interesting time because you got these soldiers in World War I wool uniforms in the middle of tropical Haiti dealing with pretty much a small war that was happening at the time. But anyways, I hope that does kind of give y'all a cool little rabbit hole to work with there, considering that we were talking about Panama Floyd's name and how Panama Floyd is the Floyd of Panama. But beyond that, getting back into his actual super chat, I do think that someone needs to bring up that to the Pootler that fighting wars in multiple different places just never works well unless they're really small wars. And even the Moldovan war for them would be an unwinnable one in the situation they're in right now. But with that, thank you so much once again for the support, and I hope that does address that quite well, because people like you, Panama, help this channel to keep running, and if it wasn't for viewer support like yours, we wouldn't be able to make this channel possible. And so with that, we are on to the next one, but thank you once again.
In our next super chat is going to another channel legend, Duncan VR. He throws in a $23 donation, and thank you, Duncan, very much as well, and very well. He says, Bamuba. Guzlik Verlijken, Marmotel, Baba Moo. Kermit said he cut off Hot Dog Man's nutsack. Oh, Kermit did that? Oh, man, that's a shame. Yeah, Baba Moo, quack, woof. How can Russia keep going with so many equipment losses? And how do they replenish new tank crews so fast? And the Baba, the woof, quack, quack.
And thank you so much for the support, WVR, channel legend. And also, thank you for the support. And to really quickly pass on to the animal noise, we'll circle back to that in a moment. But to answer how they replenish tank crews so quickly in Russia, they just take completely inexperienced, untrained guys and throw them in the tanks with like maybe a few days of training. And that's how they're doing it. That's why also the tanks perform so poorly out there and they're so badly coordinated, is because of the significantly low amount of training that a lot of tankers are now getting. But moving on into the animal noises, or more so the dictator noises that I do, Bamuba and Geschlecht bei Leib in die deutsche Welt! But nevertheless, thank you so much once again for the support, VR, and helping this channel to keep running, because folks like you make it possible. And I gotta say, I saw that Matthew omitted one part of the super chat because it was a little too spicy, but I like it. We can't read it, but I like it, and it has
what did I omit?
Oh, you omitted something about a certain kind of a sausage ball that's made out of hot dog. It was that.
I said it.
You did? I didn't hear it for some reason. It's like my mind muted it.
No, I said it for sure. I said the whole thing.
Man, dagnabbit, I'm going crazy. But anyways, thank you so much for the support, Duncan VR, and thank you once again for helping this channel to keep running, so that way even old crazy bats like myself can continue to run the channel, although I'm forgetting things Matthew literally said just 10 seconds before I started talking. But with that, thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that well, and of course, say hello to Duncan VR, everyone, a true channel legend, kind of in the similar vein as Psyops. And where the hell has Psyops been? Where has he been? But anyways, with that, thank you so much once again, Duncan VR. I hope that does address that well, and we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to the B-Man, who puts in a $22 donation, and I believe that is the first ever super chat of the B-Man on the Enforcer channel, so huge shout out to you for that, and sadly, no comment to address with the first one. But Enforcer, what say you?
I gotta thank you so much for the support, B-Man. You actually threw in 2 super chats tonight. You threw in your first one ever, which was a $2 super chat, and then you threw in your second one, which did have a comment attached to it, but then you retracted it. So sadly, I can't see it. But beyond that, I do want to say thank you so much for your first time supporting the channel tonight and helping us to keep this thing running. Folks like you make it possible, and it's greatly appreciated that you enjoy the channel enough that you find it worthwhile to try and help us to keep this thing running. Of course, nobody has to. It's a completely optional thing, but it blows us away that so many people undertake that optional thing and support this channel so that way we can make this thing a reality every single day. But with that, thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that well. I say. And with that, we're on to the next one.
I see. Our next one goes to yet another channel legend, BC Skyman this time. And BC puts in a 20 and says, whatever happened to the Bayraktars? And are they being made in Ukraine? And the Enforcers rock. And thank you, BC. He says, love Ukraine.
And you rock, BC Skyman, you rock. And to answer that question, the Bayraktars don't really get used anymore because they got shot down. Most of them did, which is kind of sad. So now they're mostly used in a naval role these days. They kind of fly them out into the Black Sea, or they have a decent amount of leeway to really fly a far ways away from anything that might shoot them down and then just look at them from afar. But they're just sadly not used like they were at the beginning of the war. They're still legends, though, of the drone forces of Ukraine. And that's why we always make sure to keep the Bayraktar song around. But beyond that, I hope that does address that well, because we've been able to pretty much confirm at this point the Bayraktar is kind of down and out, except for in very rare instances. But still, from what we also know, they're not being made in Ukraine yet. The Baykar company does have plans to open up a production plant in Ukraine and produce them there, but I think that's supposed to be done by late 2024, early 2025. So that's still a good ways away, and we're not going to be seeing any Bayraktars made in Ukraine until then. But still, thank you so much for the kind words, BC Skyman, and thank you for being a channel legend, an absolute legend. It means a lot to us that you're always here with us every single night, enjoying this channel, helping it to keep running, and also, we miss you greatly, BC Skyman, when you go on those hunting trips, because you're not in the live chat, and everyone's always like, oh man, where's BC Skyman? Like many other channel legends, like Angry Penguin, like, where in the world is Angry Penguin? And by the way, we know where he is. He's actually just taking a break because the war is, tiresome sometimes, but beyond that, thank you so much once again for support, BC Skyman. And of course, Slava Ukraini, and long live the Lee Spring Army. The Lee Spring Army will never die. And so with that, thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that quite well. And we're on to the next one.
Up next, we got a 10 from AMX Speedy Bang Bang.
Hey!
And he says, Herberg, my answer to your super chat is historically, empires would fight for resources, and fighting for resources isn't a requirement in a democracy, and Russia and China want to dominate global resources.
And I thank you so much for supporting AMX10 Speedy Bang Bang. You're actually pretty on point. Democracies really don't have to fight for resources, but sometimes for strategic reasons we do. Our wars in the Middle East really did revolve sometimes just around the control of oil resources, and it used other justifications because a lot of the public don't understand that resources are worth fighting for. A lot of people don't get that. And that's one thing that I always find funny is that people are like, man, I don't want to die for no oil company. It's like, okay, then have fun having nothing. It's like that's one thing that I always think whenever people say something like that. I'm like, that's kind of what we have to do. But beyond that, we don't have to if we don't want to. But with countries like Russia and China, they have to fight for resources specifically to even try and get ahead to have a say in the world, especially Russia, which their economy does not exist. They would like to have control over other major resources, not only to bolster themselves, but to bolster their trade and also their economy around the globe. But with that, I hope that does address that quite well indeed. And of course, I have to thank you so much once again for your support and helping this channel to keep on running AMX10 Speedy Bang Bang. And I have to say, that's a pretty accurate analysis of why the Russians and the Chinese wish to continue to expand and try and grow their spheres around the world, to really try and control the world through resources. But with that, thank you so much once again. And we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Nathan Cox, who puts in a 10 and says, can you do a little wabbit hole on the wedge-tail communication plane that Australia donated to Ukraine? And go Aussie.
And hey, thank you so much for the support, Nathan. And I will make sure to go into a rabbit hole on the wedge-tail comms plane. Wedge-tail. Let me see. Let me just pull up the Australian Air Force. And we'll find it, because I don't know the specific one that you're talking about, but I'm sure I can go through the equipment roster and find it. So, here we are. The Royal Australian Air Force. It's still royal. It's still royal. But let's see here. Let me see. They have 240 aircraft in the Royal Australian Air Force. Pretty big one, actually. But let's go down. And let's go down further. Man, they got some pretty cool ones. Let's see here. They have 63 F-35s, really nice, and 24 FA-18s, really cool. Let's see. Here's the wedge. Oh, that's the wedge tail. For some reason, I literally thought it was a tail that was a wedge tail. Like, I don't know why. I think it's because of the name. But beyond that, This thing is a modern version of the AWACS or early warning system kind of aircrafts like the A-50 mainstay. After doing a little bit of research on this off air and also with the help of some viewers, I actually found out that this aircraft, while being smaller and less impressive looking than an E-3 Sentry, which this thing is an E-7, the E-3 Sentry was based off of the Boeing 707 and is what we consider to be the classic look for an AWACS aircraft. This thing actually does the job better and on a smaller platform. This early warning system has a farther range, although it's not specifically stated out there on the internet, and on top of that, it's also more economical to operate. The reason I have not actually heard of Australia giving one of these things to Ukraine, but if they have, this will certainly be allowing the Ukrainians a massive advantage on being able to detect incoming air targets and allocate proper resources to trying to shoot them down or at least stop them from making it further into Ukraine. So I hope that does address that the best I can. There's not really a lot of publicly available information on these systems because they're some of the most advanced there's some of the most advanced aircraft around the world. And so I hope I was able to give a little bit of an explanation with what we have available to us publicly. But still, thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that quite well. And thank you once again, Nathan, for being a channel legend. And of course, supporting this channel and helping us to keep this thing rolling. Because if it was not for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to make this thing possible. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Keymaster, who throws in a $10 donation and says, respect and honor.
Hey, and respect and honor. And I gotta thank you so much for the support, Keymaster, and helping this channel to keep on running. Folks like you make it possible for us to have respect and honor, and I gotta thank you so much for that. I can't say this enough, but the way we've run this channel, and you know, with viewer support, no sponsors, no ads on these streams, has allowed us so much leeway to run this channel with what I believe would be respect and honor, not trying to over monetize what this is, which is a war, and to be able to report on this the way we would want to. That's something that a lot of people do not have the luxury of doing on YouTube, and a lot of people have also sold themselves out just to try and make a quick buck, and really all of them do that at this point, except for us, because we still don't run ads and sponsors on this stream, which is a really big thing. A lot of people don't realize how big of a thing that is. Because we do not run ads or sponsors on this stream, we actually miss out, and I don't think we're missing out, but this is a way that you can look at it. This channel misses out on making approximately, I think it's like thousands of dollars a day when we did the calculations. And we just decided to just throw that to the wind because we would rather have the channel crowdfunded and supported through y'all instead of trying to over monetize this thing and turn it into a money-making machine, which would be pretty immoral considering the kind of stuff we cover. So instead, we just take viewer support only on these streams, and that's it. And I got to thank you so much, Keymaster, for enjoying this channel and finding it to be a respectable and honorable channel, and also the Ukrainians as well, because I try my best to make sure that we're able to run this thing that way on our end. And so thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that well, and of course, folks like you help to make this channel possible, and if it wasn't for folks like you, I wouldn't be able to be here right now talking about the respect and honor that we try and conduct ourselves with while covering this news. And so with that, I hope that does address that well, and with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Little Jam, who puts in a 10 and says, hey, Enforcer and Enforcer Matt, and hello to you too. They said, my question tonight is, what would happen to Kaliningrad if and when Russia collapses? And another awesome stream tonight, and Slava Ukraine.
And thank you so much, Little Jam, for the support, and a great question. Kaliningrad would probably get reabsorbed into Poland. Poland is probably the most likely successor to retake the Kaliningrad region, or as it was called, East Prussia, if you want to call it that. They would probably be the best ones to inherit the region, although it is mostly Russian now. It actually would probably remain Russian on a demographics level after the war, because so many people are Russian from that area. And I would have to mostly say, I mean, the best thing I'd say, absorbed by Poland, or it actually end up continuing to be a part of Russia, just because there's so many Russians that live in Kaliningrad now, which used to be called Königsberg. And you can still see that the cathedral is called the Königsberg Cathedral. Check this out. It's a beautiful I think 16th century style German cathedral. Really cool. And a lot of people,
Pretty nice.
yeah, and a lot of people don't realize this, but Germany extended all the way out to the very tip, right here, all the way up until about the end of World War II. Germany pretty much extended all the way out to there, which is crazy when you think about it, because Germany is, I think, about 60%, maybe even 55% of the size they used to be when they used to have most of East Prussia, as well as other parts of modern-day Poland. I wonder if anyone's going to try and get back those lands for the German people. Someone tried and they lost. So with that, I hope that does address that well. And thank you so much once again for support, Little Jam, and helping this channel to keep on running. And I hope I was able to address that fairly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, a big shout out to John Allen, who just threw in a 20 and it did not put in a comment. But thank you, John, very much as well for that support and helping to keep us running. And Enforcer, what say you?
And thank you so much, John Allen, a legend, for the support and helping this channel to keep rolling. Folks like you make it possible. And if it wasn't for someone like you, John Allen, deciding that this channel is worthwhile to support and helping us out, we wouldn't be able to make this thing passable. And so thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that quite well indeed. And with that, we are going to be moving on to the next one.
Next up, a big shout out to John Hall and also Carl, who each put in a 5 without a comment. And thank you, John and Carl, very much for also helping to keep us running. And then we have another super chat from Nick, still thanking LSA, who puts in a 5. And it says, sending our greetings from Charlotte, North Carolina. And Carrie Ann says, thanks for making the news interesting and informative. And a long load the LSA.
And thank you so much, Nick and Carrie Ann, for both enjoying the stream and finding it interesting and informative. I try my best. We both try our best, actually, to make that possible. But you said you're from Charlotte, North Carolina. We've actually driven through there on the interstate before, but let's check this city out. Let's check this place out. There is a massive Chick-fil-A.
Chick-fil-A.
Man, that is a massive
yes,
Chick-fil-A.
Sir.
That thing is Chick-fil-A
That's a
Central
stadium,
headquarters.
I think.
Yeah, it is, but I was kidding around. I was just playing, man. But wow, really nice. Man, really nice. I like it. It's got tree-lined streets.
Nice.
Some classic.
That's nicer than I remember it.
I don't think we actually stopped in Charlotte. I think we just rode along the interstate, so we didn't get to see any of this stuff. But this is really nice.
That is quite nice.
I quite
You know,
like
it's crazy. We're told that everywhere in the country doesn't look any better than Alabama, but I'm not sure if that cracks would be the case.
I don't know, man. Maybe we need to move to North Carolina. Maybe so. There'd be some viewers like Nick and Carrie Ann that really like that. So, we could always think, oh, is that an Irish? Yeah, it is. Connolly. Yeah, it's Irish.
Connolly's on the 5th there. Want a pint?
That's it. Oh, Connolly, my boy. But beyond that, I really like this place. It's really nice. Is that a Kappa? That's a Kappa right there. He's on the beat, man. He's kind of like marching like a Russian soldier on May 9th. Jeez, that's like really going in stride there. But beyond that, thank you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on running, Nick, and of course Carrie Ann. Thank you all both for being an LSA couple and enjoying this channel and finding it worthwhile to help it to keep running. Of course, long live the Lee Spring Army. The Lee Spring Army will never die. And thank you so much once again for the support. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Tiago Andrade, who puts in a 5 and says, hello from Panama Enforcers and hello from Alabama. And you guys are the best. And thank you very much for that as well. Very kind words. He says, I just saw a really nice new military tech and look for the Skydio Scout and see what you think. And Slava Ukraine.
And let's check out this Skydio Scout. And let's see here. It is a drone. It is a drone, Matthew. I almost like busted my neck right there doing that. I don't know why, but here it is.
The Skydio Scout. I think I might have seen this somewhere. I can't remember where, though. But speaking of these drones, though, did y'all see that drone that they made to chase after the F1 cars? It looked vaguely similar, or actually pretty similar, to that drone the Ukrainians were using to go high speed. That was absolutely insane, like how the shots that thing got from the F1 cars. That was wild.
I don't even know anything about that at all. That is really
Man, you should get out more, man.
Get out more? What the hell do you mean by that?
Yeah.
I got out today.
You gotta get out more and punch in the F1 section of YouTube. That's what I mean. Like, go to a new section of YouTube, man. Get out some more.
Oh, get the hell out of here. I stay in the naval section of YouTube for some reason nowadays, just looking at like people refloating battleships and stuff about cruise ships and ocean liners. I don't know why, but that stuff's just interesting to me for no reason. But beyond that, getting back to Tiago Andrade's super chat, I gotta thank you so much for pointing this thing out. Pretty cool looking. I have a feeling it probably operates a lot like a Mavic, but maybe a more compact and more maneuverable Mavic, maybe. And also, thank you so much for being one of our viewers from Panama. We were literally just talking about your country earlier when we were talking about Panama Floyd, which is really, it's always crazy to me how sometimes we touch on some things before we get around to other super chats, because we actually don't do that deliberately. Like tonight, I just did that, and then so lo and behold, you're one of our Panamanian viewers, which is really cool. And I love to know that there's people in the Lee Spring Army from all around the world. I always find that so interesting and so cool, especially that people are from so many different nations with so many different kinds of cultures, and you're one of those people. And I gotta thank you so much once again for the support. I hope that does address that well. And Slava Ukraini, and long live the Lee Spring Army. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Epic Trains Canada, who puts in a 10 and says, even if Germany was offered Königsberg back, I don't think they would take it because no Germans live there anymore. And 99% of the buildings were wiped out during the war. And Igor, Slava Ukraine.
And Igor and Slava Ukraini. And to be honest with you, I'd agree. I don't think they'd want to take it back. There's no Germans there anymore, and there's really no reason to take it back. You know, it's like, why? Why would they do that? Why? Honestly, one cool idea I would have for Kaliningrad, and hear me out, folks, hear me out, is to create an independent country out of this thing. I think that'd be kind of cool. And let me explain why. If they pulled off a Hong Kong, where they were like some kind of a tax haven and had absolutely no tariffs restrictions, they could dominate Baltic Sea trade and end up becoming a pretty profitable country doing something like that. Now, I know a lot of people have their moral aversions to one thing or another, but when I look at a country, or a possibility of a country existing, the moral side of things kind of comes second. You really just have to figure out how to make the country succeed, because at the end of the day, your entire job of trying to be a leader of a country or a hypothetical country is to see that the nation succeeds and the citizens within it are happy and fruitful. And that's kind of the only pursuit that a leader should have, is trying to make a successful nation for a successful people. And that would be something that I would think would be really cool to see Kaliningrad turn into if Russia collapsed, is some kind of this odd, like, trading hub of the Baltic Sea. That would be so cool, because imagine that, man. Like, Kaliningrad could rapidly modernize, because most of the city is so backwards, it still uses coal heating, like coal-based fires for heating, which is just archaic, like on a fireplace level, not like on a coal power plant level.
They're putting coal in their fire pits?
Yeah, imagine that.
Oh, man. That's, I bet their houses are just full of smut.
Probably so. Soot, not smut. Like, smut's something else. Soot's what's come off of coal. But beyond that, that would be pretty cool to see, because he could probably, like, rapidly modernize, probably get a really successful economy going, and then people will look at Kaliningrad a lot like they look at Hong Kong out there in East Asia, which would be really cool, or Singapore for that matter, which is also a really cool place as well.
And what do you think smut means? I just looked it up, and it means exactly what I thought it meant.
Oh, well, I've heard smut used in different ways, and so
Yeah, I don't know what you've heard. Somebody's told you something wrong, because it means a small flake of soot or other dirt.
Hang on, let me pull up the definition. Hang on. Let's see.
I think you're thinking about SLUT, I think.
No. I just, it said, what does smut mean in books? And when you flip down that tab, it says exactly what I thought it meant. So, with that, I hope that...
I don't know who's come up with that definition that you're looking at, but that sounds like a pervert or something, because I've never heard that.
That's the only way I've heard that word used. Like, and I see a lot of people agreeing with me. Well, some people are agreeing with you, some people are agreeing with me. It's got different meanings, but I call it soot. That's like, I call it soot. But with that, I hope that does address that quite well, at least in my opinion, about what could happen to Kaliningrad afterwards, because I don't even think the Polish would want them. I don't think anyone would want them. So they probably have to turn into their own independent country if Russia collapsed and they ended up being a breakaway. But with that, I hope that does address that quite well, and thank you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And Maddie, I think we've created another A10 argument, because half of folks agree with you, half of folks agree with me in the live chat. So it is apparently, it's like the Mandela effect of words right here. What does that word mean? Apparently it's good for most people and not good for half. But with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one goes to Jason Carpenter, who puts in a 5 and says, what are your thoughts on the German army's rearguard action on the Eastern Front during the retreat from Russia?
That's a good question. The best way that I could explain it is that it was poorly organized at that point. Mostly, like, talking about, like, the rearguard action along the entire Eastern Front is kind of something a little bit too hard of a nutshell to crack, because the Germans actually divided up the entire Eastern Front into 3 operational zones. So you can kind of talk about each one of them independently from the other, because they kind of operated independently from the others. But if we want to talk about it as an overall, once again, like the French did in the Napoleonic Wars, it was mostly a failure of logistics that ensured that the Germans would not really be able to conduct a successful rearguard action. And while they were able to hold off the Russians on occasional battles on a front-wide scale, they weren't really able to hold them back well beyond 1943. It was pretty much a collapse from that point onwards. That was mainly due to the collapse of logistics behind the lines, and also the lack of the Germans to prioritize their war production towards more manageable and easy to produce medium tanks, and instead of trying to prioritize heavier tanks like the Tiger 1s and the Tiger 2s for production, which were heavily consuming steel and also valuable skill of labor to produce tanks that were in limited numbers and were in relative poor quality, even compared to, say, you know, high quality vehicles like I would say a Sherman. And when people talk about the Tigers and the Panthers and the Tiger 2s that the Germans had in World War II, amongst a whole bunch of other things, just talking about the frontline fighting side of things for the Germans, they always say that those tanks were leaps and bounds above the rest. And I think that those people have a completely different aspect of what is leaps and bounds ahead technologically than I do, because if your tank doesn't even have an operational transmission, I consider that to be poor quality. Because if you can't even drive the tank around for less than 100 miles without having to have the transmission pulled out and completely replaced, I call that poor quality. And that's what the Germans ended up suffering with heavily. And on top of that, German logistics was managed very poorly, even for the Luftwaffe, which had the worst logistics of any air force in the war, because if anything required more than patchwork to be done to an aircraft produced by, say, Messerschmitt, Messerschmitt actually required you to load the plane back onto a train and ship it all the way back to the Messerschmitt factory for them to do anything more than minor patchwork. And that became way too overbearing for a single factory to try and do in the middle of war, trying to produce new aircraft and then repair every single aircraft that's had any kind of damage on it rather than just a bullet hole. They weren't able to really manage that. So the Luftwaffe collapsed completely by the end of the Battle of Britain for the most part, and was hardly there. I mean, for most of the war, they were hardly there. The only time they really showed up after the Battle of Britain was during Operation Barbarossa, and then after Operation Barbarossa, the Luftwaffe's abilities had pretty much been depleted at that point, just because of how the rear-end logistics worked, and while they had, say, 80 aircraft at a single airfield, out of all of those, only about 15 of them were actually flyable. The rest of them were just sitting around waiting to be sent back to the factory for the repairs. But back on the Army level, their logistics were managed very poorly, and that's why the Eastern Front for the Germans was pretty much lost, is because while the Germans were losing on the logistics end awfully, the Soviets were finally starting to win on the logistics end, largely due to the Lend-Lease and the massive provision of hundreds of thousands of US-provided trucks that we gave to the Soviet Union, which allowed them to set up railroad heads, and then from there operate nearly 200 miles away from the railroad heads with a high level of efficiency, meaning that the Soviet Union, from about late 1942 onwards, had a lot more operational flexibility than the Germans did. The Germans didn't really have a large truck-borne force, and that's also another myth that's been propagated about the Germans post-war, is that they were a heavily mechanized force. In reality, only 10% of the German army in World World War II had an internal combustion engine within their unit at all. Pretty much everyone else was using horses, so their supply lines operated off of the railheads being pretty much right on the front lines, and if that railhead was damaged or destroyed, the logistics in that area were pretty much shot and completely unusable beyond that point. So I would say that the best way to describe the rear guard actions during that time was heroic stands based out of raw stupidity and a complete lack of logistics screwing them over before they even tried to attempt their heroic last stands down to the last man, like they did pretty much in every single battle from about early 1944 on. But with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. I feel like that was one of the biggest rabbit holes I could go into, and also the Eastern Front is so big, even especially in World War II, that it's really hard to just address it as this wide, giant thing, because the Eastern Front is pretty much like the Americans' Italian, French, and Pacific theaters all tied into one, and talking about them all as one big thing. But with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, and thank you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one goes to John Allen, who puts in the 20. Once again, this is, if Russia did attack with nukes, how long would it be before Moscow and St. Petersburg disappeared? Would it be 1 hour?
And that is a good question, John Allen. In reality, once the Russians launched nukes, the United States has... I think there's about 3 minutes where the nukes would not be detected, and then after 3 minutes, if they're coming over the Arctic, we finally detect them on pretty much our early warning system, which is NORAD. NORAD then would give us about a 15 to 10 minute window, depending on how good they are at detecting the incoming nuclear weapons, for the United States government to react. So at that point, if the United States government reacted at the last moment, they have about 17 minutes until the first nuclear weapons would be fired by the United States. Meaning, and of course, we're not just talking about ICBMs here. The United States also has nuclear submarines on standby in the Baltic Sea, in the Arctic Ocean. Well, is it the Arctic Ocean? I believe it is. Let's see. Probably the Barents Sea is where they'd really be, but we'll just call that the Arctic Ocean as a whole. But beyond that, there are nuclear submarines in the Baltic, the Arctic Sea, and maybe even in the Black Sea or the Mediterranean, capable of firing nuclear weapons at the Russian Federation within just moments of getting the order. So in reality, the closest amount of time that St. Petersburg and Moscow would be turned into a glass sheet on the Russian surface would probably be maybe at the earliest around 10 minutes in, or at the latest around 30 to 40 minutes in after they first launched their nuclear weapons. In reality, nuclear war and a nuclear onslaught is so terrifyingly fast, it really gives no one to react. Wars can go on for years, like the one we're seeing in Ukraine right now, and you have an endless amount of time to process what's going on, the scale of destruction, and even then, nuclear weapons make the Ukraine war look like a small blip on the radar compared to the kind of destructive scale that can be levied against both sides in a matter of less than an hour. Really about half an hour in reality. So I hope that does address that well, John Allen, at least from what I understand about the response times, but really no one would have time to react. When you think about it, 30 minutes is nothing. Like, if you think about it in a world-ending kind of a scenario like a nuclear holocaust, and I promise you, you would not want to live to see the end of a nuclear holocaust or the times afterwards. It would be a horrendous time for everyone who survived. So you really honestly want to hope to die during something like that. But yeah, it would be crazy to think about, because you wouldn't even really have time to process that you were going to die. You would just end up pretty much getting killed just a mere few moments after being told your death is inevitable. And hundreds of millions of people would be dealing with that fact at that very moment. But with that, I hope that does address that. Well, not to be pessimistic or anything, but nuclear war is something that, by all means, should be avoided as best as possible. But with that, thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that quite well. And with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you so much once again for supporting this channel.
All right, and our next one's going to go to Margaret Hemsley, who puts in a 7, and says, do you think that Russia will use helping the people in Moldova to attack Ukraine from the west?
Probably, maybe, but probably not, because they are dealing with a very limited number of Russian troops inside of Moldova. We're guessing that it's around 4,000 to 7,000 people. But it's not going to be enough to really attack Ukraine with, and it will hardly be enough to even deal with the Moldovans. because the Moldovan armed forces is around the same size as the Transnistrians and the Russians put together. So if that war was to kick off, it would be impossible for the Russians to fight the Moldovans and fight the Ukrainians on the second front simultaneously. It would be very difficult for them to pull off, and they'd probably get crushed within weeks or months trying to pull something off like that. So I would say it's a possibility, because we can't put Russian stupidity off the table, but it's not highly likely. It's probably on the very small end chance of actually happening. But with that, thank you so much once again, Margaret Hemsley, for supporting this channel and asking a really interesting question. And I hope I was able to address it well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And next up, we have a 2 from Cody D362. We have a 2 also from Wyatt Logan, as well as B-Man and Warren Zasquatch. And they said, "Slav Ukraine," and proud to be part of the LSA. And we're glad to have all 4 of you, and thank you very much for that support.
And I got to thank the 4 of y'all as well for the support and helping this channel to keep on running, because each of y'all make this channel possible. And so to all 4 of y'all, Slav Ukraine, and long live the Lee Spring Army. And with that, we are on to the next one. Thank you to all 4 of y'all once again.
And we have a 5 from Rad Doctor, who says, "Check out a new caliber, the 8.6 Blackout rifle. It's 300 Blackout, new Big Brother, made by Q. And a subsonic 338 bullet in 6.5 Creedmoor brass with a 1-3 twist." And I have heard of the 8.6 Blackout. The only catch is, though, with it is the 300 Blackout is already a very expensive round to begin with, and it sounds to me like the 8.6 is even more expensive than that. And while it does have some advantages to it, I don't think it's really worth the cost increase. If I'm understanding the price differences correctly, I believe the 8.6 is about, I think, 20 to 30% more expensive than 300 Blackout. But y'all let me know if somebody out there knows about all the ammo a little bit more than me. But, you know, Q makes some pretty good stuff, though. I like their weapons. The Honey Badger is a sick rifle. I have one myself, and it's the best rifle I've ever owned. But, Enforcer, what say you?
This little fella here, that is wild. That bullet is huge. I don't think anyone can deny that. That is probably one of the biggest bullets that I've seen on a cartridge that small in my life. I would have to say, I don't know about this thing. I mean, and also the price is insane. These things are $2 a round here on this website, like right down here. This is a 20-round box for a 16-inch barrel, because apparently the rounds are also customized specifically for the barrel length. So maybe these are match-grade rounds we're looking at, but still, $2 a round. A little bit more than that, actually. It's more like a $2 and maybe 10 cents a round. That is really expensive when you start to crunch the numbers on the costs of that. So I would have to say I probably wouldn't be a big fan of getting this kind of ammo. Really cool ammo. I mean, it's neat, no doubt. But at that cost, you could get a whole load of 45-70, which I know, ballistically, it's not an 8.6, and it won't operate like an 8.6 because it has a rainbow trajectory pretty much. But I would, in my mind, rather have 45-70 than have 8.6. And Tony Stankard said 30-06 is that high. Now, no way. Hang on. Let me go pull up Ammo Seek. I gotta go find that now. Ammo Seek 30-06. Let's see here. Let's go to Ammo Seek and let's see if we can find ourselves some info. So I'm finding 30-06 for about 75 cents a round right now on Ammo Seek, but it does climb pretty quickly. It looks like it's not that far stretched to say that 30-06 can get up to being around $1 a round. But wait, hang on. Was that some? Oh, I was about to be like, yes, because I'm always looking for the lower powered 30-06 for older rifles that shoot it, like the M1 Garands and the 1903s and stuff. I'm always looking for that kind of 30-06 pressure, because that modern high pressure stuff can screw over an M1 Garand if you try and shoot it through an M1 Garand. It will bend the op rod, and then your M1 Garand becomes a glorified single shot rifle, which I would hate to have, because the M1 Garand is a piece of work. It's an amazing gun. But still, thank you for sharing that with us, and I will keep that in the back of my mind as a consideration. But very interesting. I thank you so much once again for support, Rad Doctor, in sharing that round with us. And I hope I was able to address that fairly well, because the first time I ever heard about that round was right here today. And so with that, we are on to the next one, and thank you once again.
And the next one goes to Maxim Malai, who puts in a 5 and says, "Hey y'all, and Slav Ukraine, and thanks for your support. And as a Ukrainian American, do you feel the diaspora is vocal/active enough in lobbying for Ukraine?"
I feel like they are, but one thing I always have to say about that is I always think that diasporas like that should be a little bit cautious about being too vocal in a country they came to, because usually that it can end up causing a lot of friction. Because a lot of people will think that it's a self-serving thing to the country that these folks have come from. And that's something that always happens in every country. And I'm saying that not as like a kind of a general thing. I'm just saying that as people should always be careful about that, because whenever anyone immigrates from another country or flees another country as a refugee and then comes to any country, and in this instance the United States, and then they start talking about how the United States should do something for their home country, that can actually be used easily as propaganda in the opposition. And so that's something that I think should largely be something done low key by Ukrainians that have ended up in America, is to support Ukraine and lobby for American support, but not be overly vocal. They should leave the heavy, the large amount of vocality in America to U.S. citizens who have been here for a while, because otherwise is going to be used by the opposition. And of course, I'm going to say this because I have not been completely unaware of U.S. domestic politics. Whenever any group from outside the United States, no matter whose side they're on, ends up getting really vocal about helping the country they're from and having America do it, it is always used as a weapon by the opposite group to try and say, look at these people, they're self-serving, they only want to help themselves, and we ought to not do that because they're not prioritizing American interests. And of course, supporting Ukraine by no means is damning American interests. In fact, I think supporting Ukraine is a massive boon for American interests and also helps out Ukraine at the exact same time. But we always have to make sure to try and balance how much vocality there is, because sometimes it can be too much, and then it could end up causing a massive backfire, and the opposition can take it and run with it. So I would feel like they are vocal enough because they're out there and you see them a good deal, but I feel like they're not really that obnoxious with it. Now, some Americans have actually become incredibly obnoxious with it, and they're kind of the ones to get the ire right now from the opposition. And people say, oh, look at them, they're so obnoxious, they don't care about America or anything, because, people say that because they're ignorant. But at the same time, it's better for it to be directed at American citizens, more so than it is for Ukrainian refugees, because then there's also the possibility that it could backfire well enough that the U.S. government starts looking at deporting Ukrainian refugees and sending them back to Ukraine or back to Europe or somewhere else. So in my opinion, I hope that does address that well, because that's how I look at it. You always have to consider that a external group of people who have not been in America for a while could always end up being at the short end of the stick here in America. So the cards have to be played carefully, specifically, especially for Ukrainian Americans, and especially Ukrainians who are refugees and have arrived in America because of this war. So with that, I hope that does address that quite well, and thank you so much once again for being one of our Ukrainian American viewers. Thank you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep on running, because folks like you help to make it possible. But I hope I explained why there should be a general apprehension about being too vocal, and why the Ukrainian refugee groups and the Ukrainian Americans, in my opinion, have certainly been vocal enough, or in some instances could be a little bit more vocal or even a little bit less. But with that, I hope that does address that quite well, and thank you so much once again for the support. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to John Scott, who puts in a 2 and says, these guys, super cool, brave warriors.
All right, and I agree. The Ukrainians are very brave warriors. And I got to thank you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Pamela, who puts in a 2 and says, did Russia hit the Ukrainian nuclear power plant?
Kind of. They knocked out, I think, the one of the power connections they had to the outside world, but they didn't knock it out completely or hit the plant directly. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And we've got a 10 once more from John Allen, who says, my dad was a lieutenant in World War II and an FBI agent, and he told me to never trust the Russians. And do you agree?
I would agree.
It seems like all the old heads knew not to trust the Russians. Like my grandfather said, never trust the Russians. Seems like folks of yesteryear knew all about him. But Enforcer, what say you?
Hell, people we know nowadays, Matthew, they're like almost the same age as us, say they don't trust the Russians. Nobody who's ever dealt with Russians trusts Russians. I mean, I don't, like, that sounds pretty bad when you say it, but I have not seen a single person in America that I've known of that's actually dealt with Russians that say that you can trust them for some reason. I don't know what it is about that. Because a lot of people who don't deal with Russians trust them outright. You know, a lot of people act like Putin is a saint and only says truthful statements here in America, which I think is insane. But everybody actually dealt with them is like, nah, you can't trust these people. Like, you know, they're untrustworthy group. And I would say that that's probably a very correct statement that your dad said. And also really cool to hear that your dad was a lieutenant in World War II. I wish I could hear a little bit more about that, but still, thank you so much for the support. I hope I was able to address that well, and thank you once again for supporting this channel and helping it to keep rolling. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and we are now fresh out of Super Chat, so we're moving into our live chat questions. And our first one is going to go to Gomex Fox, who says, is Russia running out of specialists to operate the A-50 mainstay systems?
Probably. It's possible, but I think it's a little unlikely because they probably have a crew for each A-50. So while the other crews of the other two A-50s that have been shot down have been lost, the other crews running the other A-50s are probably unaffected. So I would say the chances are there, but due to that reason I just explained, probably unlikely. And so with that, I hope that does address that well, and we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Reese Ridings Roach, who says, do you think the increase in SU-34 being shot down is because of the lack of A-50s?
I don't think it's the lack of A-50s, because during the time that most of these Su-34s were being shot down, there was an A-50 airborne somewhere operating pretty much the Russian airspaces that they occupy, and also the Russian ground forces as well. I think these Su-34s are getting shot down because they're trying to use glide bombs, and that requires them to gain a lot of altitude and be easily visible to Ukrainian radar, which is leading to significant losses. I think that's the best explanation I can get at the moment, but maybe it is because they're lacking operational or effective A-50s within areas close enough to the front lines that they can actually give those Su-34s a heads up that there is a missile on the way. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And thank you so much for asking a really good question. That was actually a very good one. But with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to John B. Rimple, who says, whatever happened to the Bradley that was snagged by the Russians?
That Bradley has been transported back into Russia and is probably being dissected at the moment somewhere. We know that there's not really a lot that they can get out of it. I mean, these Bradleys are from the 1980s, so they're about 40 years old. Well, really, that Bradley iteration's more so from the 90s, but still, they're 30-something odd years old. So it's not really like they're going to be getting access to our most advanced military tech, because that stuff is old enough that it doesn't really matter. And a lot of people don't get that, you know, like, it's not good to have our stuff fall into enemy hands, but at the same time, if it's an older piece of kit, it doesn't really matter too much because we're already leaps and bounds ahead of that technologically and capably, so it doesn't matter if they get a look at it because it doesn't really have much of an impact on us these days. But with that, I hope that does address that quite well. And also, due to time constraints tonight, and also I can hear the exhaustion in Matthew's voice, and I know I'm starting to feel a little tired as well, we are going to start rounding out this question, so I'm going to answer 3 more live chats, and then we're going to round out tonight's stream. And so with that, we are on to the third to last question of the night.
And this one goes to Burke, who says, to what degree is it in the strategic interest for South Korea and Japan to help Ukraine win the war?
In their strategic interests, it actually doesn't really mean much for them. Because they're in an entirely different area of the world, and so their strategic overview is completely different than a European country's overview. So for them, it doesn't really mean anything whether Ukraine wins or loses, although they're a part of the Western sphere. But they continue to support and help just because they are a part of the Western sphere, and for that reason, they want to make sure to be a part of the Western cause. And so I hope that does address that the best I can. And with that, we are on to the second to last question of the night.
And this one goes to Ramius Builds, who says, Matt, if Russia annexed parts of Moldova, wouldn't that make the weapons caches in those areas legitimate targets for Ukraine?
Yes, the weapon caches would become legitimate targets for Ukrainian forces if the area was occupied by the Russians. So the answer to that would be 100%, undoubtedly yes. And so with that, I hope that does address that quite well, at least in my opinion, and we are on to the final question of the night. And so, who is the lucky last person who threw in the lucky last question of the night?
And that viewer is Tony Stankard, who says, the Telegraph reported yesterday that Israel is going to start supplying Ukraine with weapons, the Iron Dome, fingers crossed. And have y'all heard anything about that?
I have heard about it, but I'm not really sure if that's definite, because we have to remember that they said something very early on in the war, almost in a similar vein, and they never delivered. I don't know why. They did say, oh, we're going to give them Iron Domes, and then they never did. So I don't know if they're doing something like that again, maybe just to look like, hey, we're helping, and then they don't help. So, to be honest with you, I don't know. I would hope that they would. An Iron Dome would be such a great help, especially against Shahed drones. They would be the biggest help that the Ukrainians could ever receive in that regard, because we're starting to see that systems like the Patriot aren't necessarily cost-effective for the targets they're attempting to shoot down. A Iron Dome would be a lot more effective per target shoot down. So, I hope that does address that quite well. I mean, we don't know for sure. I mean, we have their official statement to work off, which it makes it sound like they're going to be getting them, but they made official statements before and never followed through on them. So there's a little bit of ambiguity as to whether they really would give those Iron Domes or whether it's just another empty statement again by the Israelis. We also have to keep in mind that they are dealing with a situation in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank that requires them to have a larger amount of Iron Domes available at any given time to try and intercept and shoot down any incoming air threats. So with that, and although those air threats have significantly diminished since October 7th. I mean, they're practically non-existent these days compared to what they once were. But with all that in mind, they may actually send them. But, you know, once again, I can't give you a definitive statement on that because they made one before. And I think I've said that like 4 times now. But they have made a statement like that before almost in the first 6 months of the war, and then they never delivered those Iron Domes. And so with that, I hope that does address that quite well. And we have reached the end of tonight's stream. I've got to thank every single one of y'all so much once again for watching. It has been an absolute pleasure running this stream. Tonight we had a peak viewership of 6.5 thousand people, all here, all at one time. And 44,000 people have watched this stream before it even ended right here. I've got to thank all of y'all so much once again for watching. And I got to thank every single one of y'all for finding this to be a credible source of news. Right now we are at 163,920 subscribers. Nearly 650 people have joined the Lee Spring Army today, and the Lee Spring Army continues to grow larger and larger with each and every passing day. We are entirely honored to know that so many people are joining us, and I can't wait to be able to continue the rest of continue covering the rest of the news of the war in Ukraine with all of y'all until the very end, until that last shot is fired and the peace treaty is signed. Of course, I thank you all once again, and if y'all did enjoy, make sure to check this stream out. We run this stream 6 days a week at 10 p.m. Eastern Time every single night, except for Mondays. That's the only day of the week we take off running these streams, but you can also count on our short war videos, which are about 10 to 12 minutes long, coming out every single day of the week, 7 days a week. So with that, good night, good luck, take care, stay safe, Slava Ukraini, and long live the Lee Spring Army. The Lee Spring Army will never die.
And good night, folks, and be sure to join us tomorrow night for our fundraiser stream. We're raising more money for charity for Ukraine. And it's another good stream tonight. And of course, Slava Ukraine, Heroem Slava, and good night.
Yes. The Lee Spring Army sends its regards